Hello, my dear time travelers. This is Night Wanderer. Welcome to our first evening among the marble columns and olive groves of ancient Greece, a land of heroes, philosophers, and immortal gods. Long ago, before the first Olympic Games, before the Parthenon rose on its sacred hill, before even the word Greece was spoken, there was only darkness. This darkness wasn't cold or cruel. It simply was, still, silent, endless. The Greeks called it chaos, the yawning void from which everything would one day be born. From chaos came Gaia, the earth, solid and warm. She stretched herself wide, green valleys, stone cliffs, rolling hills, and wrapped herself around the emptiness. From her womb came Uranus, the sky, who arched above her in a canopy of stars. He was her mate, her mirror, her ceiling. Together they birthed the first generation of divine beings, the Titans, towering, wild, elemental. They roamed the land before Olympus had ever been dreamt. But Uranus feared his children. One by one, he cast them down into Gaia's belly, locking them away beneath the surface. Gaia groaned, burdened by their power and their pain, and so she turned to her youngest Titan, Kronos, and handed him a sickle made of unbreakable stone. When Uranus next descended from the heavens, Kronos rose up, struck him down, and scattered his essence across the sky. From that act came stars and destiny. With Uranus gone, Kronos became king of all creation. He ruled over the Titans and the world in what mortals would later call the Golden Age, a time of peace, abundance, and ease. The earth gave her fruits freely. Rivers flowed sweet and clear, and humans lived long and without sorrow. No need for laws, no need for kings. It was a time of balance, but deep within Kronos stirred fear. He remembered the prophecy. One day, a child of his would do to him what he had done to his father. So when his wife Rhea gave birth to their children, Kronos swallowed each one whole. He consumed them not out of cruelty, but out of desperation, trying to halt fate before it reached him. First Hestia, then Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, all devoured at birth, imprisoned inside their father's vast belly. But Rhea wept. She cried to Gaia and Uranus, whose spirits lingered still in earth and sky, and together they plotted. When her sixth child was born, Rhea hid him. Instead of handing the baby to Kronos, she wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and passed it off as the infant. Kronos swallowed the stone without a thought. The real child, a boy, was taken far away to the island of Crete. There, in a hidden cave beneath Mount Ida, the infant was raised in secret. His name was Zeus. As he grew, Zeus was fed on honey and goat's milk. He trained with nymphs and warriors, learning wisdom and strength, lightning fast in body and mind. The Chorettes, armored guardians, clashed their bronze shields to hide his cries. The sky never heard him. Kronos never suspected. Years passed. And then came the moment. Zeus returned to the world of gods, disguised and cunning. With the help of the goddess Metis, he gave Kronos a draught so potent it forced the Titan to vomit. First came the stone. Then, one by one, Zeus's siblings emerged, unharmed and full-grown. First Hestia, then Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Together, the 6 children of Kronos formed a new alliance, one that would shake the heavens. War erupted. The Titanomachy, War of the Gods. The Titanomachy, a war between Titans and Olympians, lasted for 10 full years. On one side, Kronos and his brother Titans, ancient and immense, commanding the raw forces of nature. On the other, Zeus and his siblings, younger but driven, armed with fate and fury. The battles were unlike anything the world had seen. Mountains were hurled across valleys, oceans boiled, thunder split the skies, and great beasts howled from every crevice of the earth. Zeus, wielder of thunder, struck from the air. Poseidon, master of the sea, brought tidal waves crashing onto the land. Hades, silent and shadowed, crept beneath the battlefield, collapsing the ground beneath enemy feet. But the war could not be won by strength alone. And so, Zeus descended into Tartarus, the deepest pit beneath the world, where 3 monstrous beings had been imprisoned, the Hecatonchires, giants with 100 arms each, and the Cyclopes, with single blazing eyes and forges that could melt the bones of mountains. Zeus freed them. In gratitude, the Cyclopes forged 3 sacred weapons. For Zeus, the thunderbolt, lightning tamed in hand. For Poseidon, the trident, which could shake the seas. For Hades, the helm of darkness, making him invisible at will. Armed with these divine tools, the Olympians surged forward. Kronos fell. One by one, the Titans were struck down and cast into Tartarus, bound in chains that glowed with celestial fire. The war was over. A new order rose. Zeus, crowned king of gods and sky. Poseidon, ruler of the sea. Hades, lord of the underworld. Their sisters took their places too. Hera as queen of Olympus, patron of marriage and power. Demeter as goddess of the harvest and growth. Hestia, keeper of hearth and home, ever still and ever warm. And thus began the age of Olympus. After the Titans were cast into Tartarus and Olympus crowned its new rulers, the world still waited. The sky had been claimed by Zeus, the sea by Poseidon, and the shadowed depths by Hades, but the lands above, those rolling hills and stretching plains, the rivers and forests and silent coasts, still lacked life that could truly walk beneath the heavens with meaning. The gods in their lofty palaces gazed down upon the earth with mixed thoughts. To them, the stones and trees, the winds and waters were beautiful, yes, but unfinished. There was silence where there should have been song. There was movement, but no purpose. And so, one day a quiet figure descended from Olympus, not with thunder nor spectacle, but with care and thought. He was not like the others. He did not rule a kingdom or demand temples in his name. He walked alone, barefoot upon the moss, his cloak dusted with the ash of forgotten fires. His name was Prometheus. Though born of the Titans, he had sided with Zeus in the Great War, not out of loyalty, but from vision. In him lived a deeper understanding of the world's shape, its hunger for thought, for light, for becoming. And so Prometheus, with hands of clay and a mind of fire, set about his work. He wandered the valleys and riverbeds, collecting soil softened by rain and sand warmed by sun. In a quiet grove, shaded by old olive trees, he began to shape forms from the earth. not beasts, not creatures of fang or wing, but beings upright and aware, whose eyes looked upward, not down. He molded their limbs with grace, gave them fingers like his own, shaped their brows to carry thought, and pressed into them the potential for language, for wonder, for love. The other gods watched with distant interest, some amused, others indifferent. To them, these little clay figures were curiosities, delicate toys, fragile and limited. But Prometheus saw something else. He did not simply give them shape, he gave them time. He sat with them beside fires that did not yet burn. He showed them how to listen to the wind, how to follow the stars, how to read the river's mood and the song of birds before a storm. But they were cold. The nights were long and the caves damp, the rains unforgiving and the dark full of fear. These creatures he had formed could not yet survive on admiration alone. They trembled in the wind and huddled in silence, their potential dimmed by their powerlessness. Prometheus climbed back to Olympus. There, beneath the high arches and golden halls, a fire burned, eternal, sacred, reserved only for the gods. Its flames were not merely heat and light, they were intellect, spirit, clarity. Prometheus approached Zeus, not boldly, but with measured respect, and asked if this fire might be shared. Not all of it, just a spark, a whisper, a gift to those who bore the breath of life, but not yet its tools. Zeus, seated on his throne of cloud and judgment, refused. Fire was divine. Mankind, shaped of dust and dreams, was too wild, too young, too close to chaos. Let them crawl, he said. Let them fear the dark. In their helplessness, they will be loyal. Prometheus left without a word. That night, as the gods dined and drank under the canopy of starlight, he returned. He took a stalk of fennel, hollow and dry, and slipped into the hall of the sacred flame. With one hand he caught its edge, a golden flicker no larger than a candle's breath, and sealed it inside the stalk. Then, beneath the veil of clouds, he descended. He found his people huddled in the cold, their eyes reflecting nothing but the moon. He knelt, cracked the fennel open, and set the fire upon a pile of dry branches. The flames rose, hesitating at first, then hungry. The people stared, at first in silence, then awe. They reached out and felt warmth, not just on their skin, but within. And from that warmth came the first songs, the first tools, the first stories etched into bark and stone. With fire they cooked, with fire they forged, with fire they lit the caves and named the stars. Civilization had begun, not with conquest, but with a flicker stolen in love. But Olympus saw, Zeus saw, the gift had been given. It could not be undone, but punishment could be made. Prometheus was seized, dragged not with violence but with ritual. His limbs were not broken, but bound, every knot tightened with divine purpose. He was carried to the edge of the world, where the mountains touched the sky and no path could follow. There, on the cold cliffs of the Caucasus, he was chained to the rock. Zeus did not speak to him, he only looked. And in that look was centuries of silence. Each day an eagle came. It descended on black wings and tore into Prometheus's side, devouring his liver with methodical hunger. Each night the wound healed. Each dawn the eagle returned. It was not death. It was not mercy. It was eternity. But Prometheus never screamed. He stared at the sun as it rose, he watched the clouds and the moon, he whispered to the wind, and in his stillness he remained stronger than the chain, stronger than the pain. For down below, the people he had shaped were changing. They built homes, they tamed horses, they wrote music, they argued and dreamt. And some, in moments of quiet, looked up to the mountains and wondered if someone was watching over them. He never called for help, but help came many ages later, not from Olympus, but from the ground. A man came walking, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a lion's pelt, his bow across his back. His name was Heracles. He said nothing. He looked at Prometheus, raised his bow, and shot the eagle clean from the sky. It fell dead, and the chains broke. Prometheus did not fall. He stood, and though his body was scarred, his eyes were whole. He walked away into the high snows, not to return to Olympus, not to claim revenge, but to wander again, to find the next fire that must be lit. In the quiet years that followed, when mankind had fire and language and the patience to sow seeds in the ground, the gods turned their gaze again toward the earth. Among them, there was one who did not seek temples or thunder or battle songs in her name. She did not descend with lightning or blaze with glory. She came with the rains, with the wind that bends the wheat, with the soft gold of ripened barley and the hush of orchards in the morning. Her name was Demeter. She was the goddess of the harvest, of the tilled field and the granary, of the hands that plant and the hands that gather. She walked the earth not as a queen, but as a presence, felt in the green shoots of spring and in the sigh of soil when the last sheaf was taken. Where she stepped, things grew, and where she wept, nothing did. To those who lived close to the land, Demeter was more than a name. She was the reason the bread rose in the oven, why bees returned to hives, why the cows gave milk in May. They left her offerings, not in gold, but in grain and honey, in wreaths of dry corn husk and painted clay bowls of fruit set near the door. She needed nothing more, but for all the earth she fed, her joy rested in only one place. She had a daughter, Persephone. The girl was born not of storm or ambition, but of love, deep, quiet, maternal love, the kind that wakes early to make a fire before the house is cold. Demeter raised her not among the gods, but in meadows and gardens, where the flowers bowed as she passed, and streams laughed against stones to amuse her. Persephone had hair like black silk and hands always stained with pollen. She was light-footed, curious, never still. She spoke with bees, she made crowns from wild rosemary and sang to the reeds. Where her mother was rooted, Persephone reached, and where Demeter was certainty, Persephone was the bloom that risked itself for the sun. But the earth is not all light. And one day, as Persephone wandered further than usual, chasing butterflies near the edge of a dark ravine, the ground trembled. There was no warning, only the sudden crack of the earth, the shattering of wildflowers, and the roar of hooves. From the chasm rose a chariot, black and gleaming, pulled by horses whose manes shimmered like smoke. At its helm was Hades, the lord of the underworld, not cruel, not monstrous, but still and shadowed, like a cave you do not enter, like a silence that does not echo. He had seen Persephone once, from afar, and the thought of her had never left him. He rose from his realm not to destroy, but to claim. In a breath, he reached her, lifted her into the chariot, and the earth closed again above them, wildflowers tumbling into the silence. No one saw it happen. Only the grove knew. Only the wind that still carried her name repeated softly through the leaves like a lullaby unraveling. When Demeter noticed the stillness, when the birds did not return, when the lilies bent without bloom, when the wheat stopped whispering, she knew her daughter was gone. And so began the wandering. Demeter, once radiant with green and gold, became pale, cloaked in ash, her feet bare and blistered from miles uncounted. She roamed the earth in mourning, she questioned every stream, every breeze, every shepherd who crossed her path. Her voice, once warm as summer, grew thin, cracked by loss. Fields withered, rain fell and turned to frost before it reached the roots. The trees shed their leaves too soon. Hunger spread, not from war or mischief, but from a mother's grief. Even the gods grew uneasy. Zeus, seeing the world fail, sent Hermes, his silver-tongued messenger, to the underworld. He descended swiftly, his sandals stirring no dust, and came before Hades with calm words and quiet eyes. Hades listened. He did not argue. He had not taken Persephone out of cruelty. He had given her a throne beside his own, a crown of jet and silver. She walked now through halls of bone and ruby, attended by silent shades and ghostly flowers that bloomed only in darkness. She had not cried, not after the first day, not after the second. In time she asked for a garden. She had grown, but when she heard her mother's name spoken in Hermes' mouth, a silence passed through her like wind through dry grass. She agreed to return, but Hades, careful and clever, offered her a final gift before she left, a pomegranate. Its skin was dark and glossy. He opened it gently, revealing seeds like rubies. She took 6, ate them slowly, thoughtfully. She did not ask what they meant. When she stepped onto the earth again, the sun broke through a sky that had not known light in months. Grass rose where her feet touched, birds returned. Demeter ran to her, and the earth bloomed like a second creation. But joy was not yet whole. The seeds bound Persephone to the underworld, not forever, but for a portion of each year she must return, to sit on the dark throne, to rule beside the silent king. Demeter wept again, but this time not from loss, from understanding, and so came the seasons. When Persephone is on earth, the land sings, blossoms fill the orchards, and the air smells of sweet hay and rain. But when she returns to the underworld, the soil sleeps, the trees grow quiet, the world waits. And each year, when spring returns, it is not just a season, it is a reunion, a breath held, a daughter stepping again into her mother's arms. In a time when the world was still new, and the gods often walked among men, sometimes hidden, sometimes not, there lived a boy who did not yet know he was a hero. His name was Perseus, and he was born not in a palace, nor among soldiers, but on an island surrounded by salt wind and the smell of olive trees. His mother, Danae, had once been a princess, daughter of a king who feared the whisper of a prophecy. That prophecy told of her son, who would grow to bring the king's death. And so the king, with the trembling logic of frightened men, sealed Danae in a bronze chamber where no voice, no light, no love could enter. But love has many forms. One day, as the sky darkened and the sea grew still, Zeus came to her, not as a man, but as golden rain falling gently through the cracks in the roof, pooling like sunlight on the cold floor. From that touch, Perseus was conceived. When the king discovered the child, he did not kill him. He chose instead a slower death, one hidden behind ceremony and false mercy. He placed Danae and her infant son into a wooden chest, sealed it, and cast it into the sea. The waves took them, the wind carried them far from home, and the sea, kind and ancient, bore them not to ruin but to refuge. They drifted into the island of Seriphos, where a humble fisherman named Dictys found them on the shore, Danae still holding the child tightly, though the chest was half sunken and the sky above grey with warning. Years passed. Perseus grew beneath the sun and salt. He learned to climb the cliffs, to read the gulls in the sky, to throw stones with precision, but he also learned silence. His mother's quiet sadness was never named, but it shaped his days like wind shapes the coast, slow, constant, invisible. The island was small, but it had a king. His name was Polydectes, and his heart, unlike Dictys, was not kind. He saw Danae not as a guest, but as something to possess. He spoke to her with smiles too wide, promises too smooth. And Perseus, though still young, saw it all. To rid himself of the boy, Polydectes turned to deceit. He announced a celebration and demanded that all men of the island bring him a horse as a gift. Perseus, who had no horse, no gold, no land, stood before the king with empty hands. "I have no horse," he said, his voice steady, "but name another gift, and I will bring it." The king's eyes gleamed. "Bring me the head of Medusa." The court laughed. They expected silence. They expected the boy to tremble, to beg. But Perseus only nodded. He did not understand what he had agreed to. And yet something in him, quiet and unshaken, had already said yes. He left that same night, carrying no sword, no shield, only the salt of his island still in his hair and the memory of his mother's eyes. The gods watched. Athena, grey-eyed and precise, came to him first. She gave him a mirror shield, polished so fine that it held the sky like water. "Do not look at her," she said, "only at her reflection." Then came Hermes, light-footed and smiling, with winged sandals that whispered against the ground, and a blade so sharp it seemed not to cut, but to erase. To reach her, Hermes said, "You must go where no map leads." And so began the journey, not across land, but through dreamlike places where time coiled and mountains seemed to breathe. He passed the Grey Sisters, 3 ancient beings who shared one eye between them. From them he took not cruelty, but knowledge. He learned where Medusa slept, far beyond the edge of the world, where the ocean met the sky and the sun rose not in light but in silence. Medusa was once beautiful. That too the gods had made, but her beauty had angered Poseidon, who took what he wanted inside Athena's temple. In rage, Athena cursed the girl, not the god. Her hair turned to snakes, her face became a death sentence, her gaze turned life to stone. She fled, not to terrorize, but to be left alone. Her breath still warmed the air, her heart still beat, but no one could look upon her and live. When Perseus reached her, it was nearly dawn. The garden of statues around her was still, untouched by wind. Warriors, horses, even birds caught mid-flight, all frozen in perfect fear. He walked slowly, his eyes fixed only on the shield's surface. It was like moving through a nightmare made of mirrors. She slept. The snakes writhed softly. Her brow was furrowed, as if her dreams had not known peace in years. He raised the blade, and in a breath it was done. No scream, no shatter, only silence. He placed her head in a sack lined with bronze, wrapped tightly with cloth, and turned away. The sun broke across the horizon then, golden and wide. For a moment the statues looked alive again, shadows falling like breath across their stony faces. He did not look back. The return was not marked by triumph. He flew low, alone, the weight of the head heavy on his back. But when he arrived home, he did not go to Polydectes first. He went to his mother. Only then did he enter the king's hall. And when he pulled Medusa's head from its wrappings, even the air recoiled. The king and his guards turned to stone before they could speak. Their faces held fear, surprise, and something that might have been regret, but were now only shapes, hard and cold and eternal. Perseus did not celebrate. He left the island soon after. He would go on to build cities, to marry, to father children. His name would be carved into stone, sung in poems. But for those who remember truly, Perseus was not a killer. He was not even a warrior. He was a son. And his story, like so many others, began and ended with the quiet love of a mother and the long journey of a boy who simply kept walking forward. There are stories that begin with the gods, and there are others that begin with men who are shaped by gods only later. And then there are stories that begin with a name whispered before birth, carried like a thread through time, until the moment that name meets its fate. This is the story of Theseus. He was born in the city of Troezen, far from the marble weight of Athens, where the hills were gentler and the air smelled of pine and warm stone. His mother Aethra raised him in quiet, telling him stories not of his father, but of a future he would one day be ready for. She did not name the man who had come to her in the night, walking barefoot across the sand after the moon had risen. She only said, "When you are strong enough to lift the stone, you will find the truth." And so the boy grew. He climbed trees not for fruit, but for the view. He ran along cliffs with bare feet, the sea wind in his hair. He listened more than he spoke, and each day he passed the stone. It was not large, just a flat slab resting in the earth behind his mother's house, covered in moss and the memory of weight. But he knew. She never said the words, but he knew. One day. That day came when the sun stood high and the boy's shadow was nearly gone. He walked to the stone alone, placed both hands on it, and lifted. It did not move at first. Then, like waking from a dream, the weight shifted. Beneath it, wrapped in cloth, lay a sword and a pair of sandals. Nothing more. His mother stood nearby, quiet. "Now," she said, "you may go to Athens." The road to Athens was not paved. It was crooked, broken, full of places where kindness went to sleep. But Theseus did not sail, as others might. He walked, and each turn in the road brought him face to face with those who would take what they could. A man who robbed travelers and tied them to trees, a giant who bent metal into death, a keeper of a bed who made sure every guest fitted perfectly by cutting them down to size. Theseus did not pass them. He stopped. He stood. He watched. And when the moment came, he fought, not with rage, not with madness, but with a calm that made his enemies forget their cruelty. By the time he reached Athens, his name was already carried by the wind, though he had not yet claimed it. In Athens, a darker story waited. Each year, the city sent 7 boys and 7 girls across the sea, offerings to a kingdom they had once angered, Crete, where King Minos ruled with a voice like iron and eyes that did not blink. There, beneath the palace of Knossos, a labyrinth had been built, and in its center waited something not fully man, not fully beast, the Minotaur. The people whispered of it, horned and hunched, eyes like coals, breath like smoke. They said it wandered day and night, that it knew the paths of the labyrinth better than any map, that it never slept. No one had returned. Theseus heard the story. He heard the silence that followed it. And he said simply, "I will go." He did not do it to be brave. He did not do it for glory. He did it because something in him recognized the moment when a name becomes what it was always meant to be. He boarded the ship with the others. The sails were black, the mood heavier still. They crossed the sea in silence. Crete was all stone and sun, and Minos was a king who saw the world like a ledger, owed or paid. He looked at Theseus and saw only another line on the page, but his daughter Ariadne saw something else. She saw a man who did not boast, a man who listened when others wept, a man who stood still, even when fear tried to move his feet for him. That night she came to him. She gave him a spool of thread, pale as moonlight, and said, "Take this, tie it at the entrance, unwind it as you walk, and when you find the monster, remember it was born of cruelty, not evil. Remember what it means to be lost." Theseus said nothing, but he took the thread. They led him to the mouth of the labyrinth at dawn. There were no goodbyes, only stone steps and a breath that felt too shallow. Inside, the air changed. It was cool, damp, echoing. The walls wept in places, the passages twisted without pattern. Some were wide, others so narrow he had to turn sideways to pass. The thread unspooled behind him, silent as snow. Hours passed, or days. Time did not live there. At last, he heard it. Not a roar, not footsteps, breathing, and then eyes in the dark. The Minotaur stood not like a monster, but like a shadow that had been waiting. Its chest rose and fell, its horns scraped the ceiling, its hands were rough, human, its face was not rage, it was hunger, yes, but also pain. They fought, but it was not the clash of titans, it was short, quiet, sudden. When it ended, Theseus stood alone. He followed the thread back, finger by finger, moment by moment, until the sunlight kissed his face again. He did not cheer. He did not raise the sword. He walked, and behind him the labyrinth remained, not empty, but changed, for now it held not a monster, but memory, of a boy who walked into the dark and did not become it, before he was a legend, before his name became a measure of strength and statues were carved in his likeness. He was just a child, a boy with strong hands and eyes that looked too old for his age, a child whose life was marked not by fortune, but by a weight placed upon him before he ever drew his first breath. His name was Heracles, though the Romans would later call him Hercules. He was born to a mortal woman, Alcmene, who lived with kindness but carried sorrow in her bones. The father of the child was not her husband, but Zeus, who came to her disguised as that very husband, cloaked in stolen love and the scent of rain. The child was born large, quiet, watchful, but not all watched with joy. Hera, queen of the gods, saw in Heracles not a child, but a wound, a mark of betrayal. She hated not him, but what he symbolized, Zeus's unfaithfulness, the reminder that even gods lie, and so she did what only gods can do. She cursed the boy not with death, but with struggle. She sent serpents to his cradle, two, thick-bodied and gliding, their tongues flicking the air. They meant to wrap around his throat, to silence his breath, but Heracles, though still wrapped in linen, sat up and reached out. He took one snake in each hand, and when his mother came rushing in, led by a scream that never came, she found him laughing, the serpents limp beside him. The years passed, and the boy grew, not just in size, but in something else, grit, patience, silence. He trained in music, though his hands were better suited to the bow. He learned philosophy, though his thoughts often wandered toward the earth, the forest, the hunt. He was kind, but his kindness had weight. He was gentle, but only because he knew the strength he carried. And yet, no strength is enough to stop what the gods have begun. Hera waited. She whispered madness into his sleep. One morning, Heracles awoke to find himself surrounded by silence too deep. His wife and children lay still, their bodies already cold, his own hands stained with what he could not remember. Grief did not come in tears, it came in exile. He wandered for days, then weeks, until the oracle at Delphi told him what he already feared. To cleanse his soul, he must serve his cousin Eurystheus, king of Tiryns, a small man with a narrow gaze and a heart that beat a little faster whenever Heracles stood too close. It was Eurystheus who devised the 12 labors. They were not tasks, they were punishments written in blood and distance, each one meant to break him. The first was the Nemean lion, a beast whose hide could not be pierced by blade or arrow. Heracles hunted it for days across dry hills, where even the birds flew silent. When he found it, the lion charged. Heracles dropped his weapons and met it with bare arms. The fight was brutal, wordless. When it ended, he stood beneath the trees, his chest heaving, the lion limp across his shoulders. He skinned it with its own claw and wore the pelt like a second skin. Then came the Lernaean Hydra, whose heads multiplied when severed. He brought a torch and cauterized each wound before another could rise. He walked into Erymanthian forests and wrestled the great boar. He climbed the peaks of Arcadia, captured the golden horned deer sacred to Artemis, not with violence, but with patience. Years passed in labor. He cleaned the Aegean stables, not with brooms, but by rerouting a river. He chased the Stymphalian birds, their feathers sharp as knives, and drove them from the lake with a rattle forged by Hephaestus himself. He tamed the Cretan bull, stole the mares of Diomedes, and ventured to the far west to seize the belt of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, though her death, like so many in his life, came not from his desire, but from misunderstanding and the fear of others. He was sent across the sea, beyond the edges of the known world, to steal the cattle of Geryon, a giant with 3 bodies and 1 soul. He crossed the desert where the sun itself seemed to burn through his bones, and there, in the empty land, he lifted a mountain to mark his passage. Some say those rocks became the pillars of Heracles, standing still between continents. His 11th labor took him beneath the roots of the world to the garden where the Hesperides guarded golden apples that shimmered with light not of this earth. He did not steal them. He asked Atlas, who held the sky on his shoulders, to help. When Atlas returned with the fruit, Heracles smiled and tricked him into taking the burden back, not with malice, with wit. The last task was the darkest. He descended into the underworld. There he faced Cerberus, the 3-headed hound that guarded the realm of the dead. He did not kill it. He wrestled it, calmly, with strength that matched even the will of Hades. He brought the beast into the world of the living, let it be seen, then returned it to its gate. And when it was done, he stood not as a god, not yet, but as something more than mortal, not because of the strength he had shown, but because he had not turned away, because he had walked into every darkness and come back, not untouched, but still walking. People feared him, worshipped him, called him son of Zeus. But Heracles never forgot the weight of that first cradle, the silence after madness, the way the sun felt on his back when no one waited at home. He lived long after the labors, fought again, loved again, was betrayed again. But when death came, it did not take him in the way it takes most. It burned him clean, and the gods, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of reverence, lifted what remained to the stars. Even now, on cold nights when the sky is clear and quiet, you can still see his name in the sky, written in fire, not as a warning, but as a memory of what it means to endure. Some stories do not thunder. They do not shake the earth or split the sky. Some stories move like music played on a single string, soft and slow, and all the more powerful for it. Orpheus was born with such a story. He was not a warrior. He did not carry a shield or conquer cities. He carried a lyre, a gift from Apollo himself, strung with golden strings and tuned not for glory, but for beauty. From the first time his fingers touched it, the world changed. Birds turned mid-flight to listen. Rivers stilled their current. Trees leaned closer. People said he could tame wild beasts with a single melody, and perhaps that was true. But Orpheus did not play to tame. He played because it was how he spoke. Words fell short for him. Music carried what speech could not. Grief, wonder, longing. In his hands the lyre wept and laughed, whispered and roared. He wandered the hills of Thrace, sometimes alone, sometimes with others, never quite belonging anywhere. And then one day, beneath the olive trees where the shade was thick and the ground soft with clover, he met her, Eurydice. She did not arrive with fanfare. She did not speak in riddles or shine with otherworldly light. She walked barefoot. She smiled easily. She looked at him and did not flinch from the quiet that surrounded him. He played, and she sat beside him. That was enough. They married beneath an open sky, surrounded by wind and friends and the low hum of the earth itself. Orpheus had never known such stillness inside himself. It was as if his songs no longer needed to explain him. She already understood. But joy in myths is never left untested. The day was bright and Eurydice walked ahead, laughing, her feet brushing over tall grass. A serpent hidden in the green struck without warning. She cried out once, and then she was gone, just like that. Orpheus did not rage. He did not tear his clothes or curse the gods. He only grew quiet, quieter than ever. So quiet the birds stopped singing, so quiet even the wind dared not move. And then he did what no one else had done. He walked into the underworld, not with sword, not with magic, but with a song. He passed the gates where Cerberus slept, and the great hound did not rise. He crossed the river Styx, and Charon, who ferried only the dead, held out his hand without a word. Even the souls of the dead, endless and whispering, parted to let him through. He stood before Hades and Persephone, the king and queen of all things lost, and he played. He played not to beg, but to show, to lay bare. His music did not argue, did not plead. It told the story of a man who had loved and lost, of hands once held and now empty, of a voice once known and now gone. It spoke in chords the shape of grief. Even the shadows wept. Hades, whose heart was carved from silence itself, was moved. "You may take her," he said, "but you must not look back, not once. She will follow, and if you trust me, you will see her again in the light." Orpheus nodded, and so they began the climb. The way back was long and steep. The walls wept, the air grew thin, and behind him he could hear only the sound of feet, bare, soft, uncertain, always just far enough to doubt. He did not speak. He did not pause. He only walked. But as the first edge of daylight touched the tunnel mouth, doubt entered him like a crack in the heart. Was she still there? Had the gods tricked him? Was he alone once more, carrying only echoes? He turned, and in that instant he saw her. Not shadow, not spirit, Eurydice. Her eyes wide, her lips just beginning to smile, and then she was gone, pulled back as if by wind, dissolving into mist, her fingertips reaching for his one last time. Orpheus cried out then, not loud, not wild. It was a sound so quiet it could not be written, only remembered by the stones. He returned to the world of the living, but he did not play, not again, not for years. He wandered, he grew thin, he stopped speaking altogether. They say the muses who once watched him with pride wept when they saw him. They say he died not from violence, but from stillness, from the slow unraveling of a soul that had once sung to the gods. But others say that when he died, the lyre was placed in the stars, and there it sings still. And if you listen late at night, when the world is very quiet, when even the trees hold their breath, you might hear it, not the notes, not the words, but the shape of love that would follow someone into the dark and keep walking. Far from the noise of Olympus, away from the roaring of lions and the clashing of swords, there once lived a man whose hands could build anything. Not a god, not a hero, just a man with tools, with thought, and with silence. His name was Daedalus. He lived in Athens once, long before it became marble and myth, when the city was still a collection of streets that smelled of bread and iron. Even as a child, he built things, not toys or games, but objects that moved with purpose, hinges that did not creak, pulleys that needed no explanation, statues that almost breathed. People feared him a little, though they didn't know why. He was not cruel, but there was something in his eyes that always seemed elsewhere, as if he saw the world not as it was, but as it could be, rearranged, refined, improved. But greatness, especially among men, brings shadows. One day, in a moment of jealousy or fear, or maybe just misunderstanding, Daedalus killed a nephew who had invented something clever, too clever. Some say it was an accident, some say it was grief disguised as anger. He was exiled for it, quietly, without celebration. He fled to Crete, to the court of King Minos, who welcomed brilliance the way others welcomed gold. There Daedalus worked. He built palaces where light fell exactly where it should, walls that cooled themselves in the heat of summer. He crafted traps and toys and water channels that sang like flutes. People said he spoke to stone, but his greatest creation, the one remembered long after the palaces crumbled, was a prison, the labyrinth. Minos had asked for it, a maze so complex that even the builder would not find his way through it again, and Daedalus built it. Slowly, carefully, each turn and corridor laid like lines of a poem only he understood. When it was done, Minos smiled, but Daedalus did not. For deep in the center, locked in darkness, paced the Minotaur, a child of shame, of punishment, a creature born of something no one wanted to name, and Daedalus had made the cage. Minos, afraid Daedalus might speak of what he had built, kept him prisoner, not in a cell, but on the island. No chains, no guards, just the sea and his son, Icarus. The boy grew tall, restless. He knew little of Crete's politics or Athens' stone. He knew his father's hands, watched how they shaped wood, how they spoke more through hammer and wax than words. He believed his father could do anything. One night, the stars were low and the sea quiet. Daedalus brought Icarus into the workshop. He pointed at the feathers spread across the table, the wax melting slowly over a small flame, the bones of gulls drying in the corner. "We're going to fly," he said. Icarus didn't laugh. He had never known his father to joke. For weeks they worked silently, side by side, feathers stitched to linen, wax warmed and cooled, shaped and set. Wings grew, not from magic, but from memory of how birds curved into the sky, how air moved across water, how longing builds in the chest like pressure before rain. And then the day came. They stood at the edge of a high cliff, the sea murmuring far below. The wings were strapped to their arms and backs, tight and trembling. Daedalus looked at his son. "Fly low," he said, "not too close to the water, or the spray will weigh you down, but not too high. The sun will melt the wax." Icarus nodded. His eyes were wide, his hair already lifting in the morning wind, and then they leapt. Not all flights are sudden, some begin like falling, but the wings held, the air caught them, and together they rose. For a time there were no kings, no labyrinth, no exile, only sky. They flew above the waves, and the sea was nothing but a reflection of the sky. The world looked small. The wind sang. Daedalus flew ahead, glancing back now and then. But Icarus was laughing. He rose higher. The air was thinner. The sun was brighter, and the wax began to soften. The feathers trembled, pulled loose one by one. Icarus looked down. There was no ladder, no stair, no thread, only open air. He did not scream. He fell. Daedalus landed alone. He searched the shore for hours, then days, calling the boy's name into the rocks, into the wind. He found the wings first, wet and broken, then, further down the beach, something smaller, a piece of wax, a sandal. He built no monument. He told no one. He buried the boy with his own hands and walked away. Years later in Sicily, in a quieter place, he built again. Machines and temples, devices no one else understood. People came to him for help. He nodded, handed them tools, returned to his work, but he never made wings again. And when someone asked about the sea, why it felt heavier in one place than another, why the gulls circled in that one bay and never elsewhere, he only said, "That's where the sky once touched the earth." Before the war, before the ships were dragged ashore and the dust of 10 years covered the bones of men, there was a boy who ran faster than the wind. His name was Achilles. He was not raised among mortals, not quite. His mother Thetis was a sea nymph, bright as salt spray and cold as moonlight. When Achilles was born, she held him above the waters of the Styx, dipping him in to make him invulnerable. The river took every part of him, arms, legs, chest, back, except the heel where her fingers gripped. That small place remained flesh, a secret, a hinge. Thetis feared the world. She feared what it would do to her son. So she sent him to be raised in hiding, not in a palace, but on the slopes of Mount Pelion, where the old centaur Chiron taught boys to be men. Chiron was not cruel. He taught with patience, not punishment. He gave Achilles scrolls, not just swords, music and medicine, herbs and language. He taught him the names of the stars and the roots that could ease pain or end life. And there, on that mountain, in a house made of stone and cedar, Achilles grew, taller than the others, quicker, brighter. But no one grows alone. Among the students was Patroclus, quieter, thinner, with eyes that always seemed to be searching the air. He had been sent away from his home for a crime, though no one spoke of it. The boys sparred, studied, bled together, but slowly, gently, they became something more. Not friends, not brothers, not lovers, though people would later try to name them so. They were simply each other's. When they left the mountain, it was to follow a shadow rising in the east. A prince of Troy, Paris, had stolen the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. Or perhaps she had left. The stories change, but the outrage did not. Menelaus called upon all kings who had once sworn an oath to sail, to fight, to burn Troy to the ground if needed. And so the ships were built, black-hulled and sharp, more than 1,000, the wind filled with the smell of pitch and ambition. Achilles was not yet a man, but the war called him. He sailed with his warriors, the Myrmidons, fierce and silent, who followed him not for gold, but for his fire. Patroclus came too. He did not carry a sword at first. He carried bandages, water. He watched the skies. When they landed, the war did not begin with fire. It began with boredom. Years passed. The Greeks camped on the shore, building walls, burning villages, arguing among themselves. The Trojans watched from behind their great gates, waiting. But Achilles did not wait. He fought. And wherever he went, the earth broke. No man could match him. His spear struck like lightning. His voice carried across the plain like a drumbeat. He was beautiful in battle, dreadful, bright, untouchable. And then one day he stopped. The cause was a woman, not Helen, another, a captured girl, taken by Achilles in war, claimed by Agamemnon, the Greek commander, with the slow greed of power. Achilles, insulted, walked away. He sat by the shore, far from the camp, watching the sea where his mother had once lived. He did not speak. He did not fight. The battles raged without him, and men began to die in numbers that made the gods uneasy. Patroclus watched. He watched the wounded pile up. He watched the morale thin like old cloth. And one night he put on Achilles' armor. He did not ask permission. He stepped into the image of a god, not to deceive, but to protect. The Greeks saw him and believed Achilles had returned. Their spirits rose, the tide turned, but the armor was only armor. And Hector, Prince of Troy, the greatest of their warriors, saw it too late. He fought Patroclus fiercely as he would have fought Achilles himself, and when he struck, the world shifted. Patroclus fell, and the armor clattered to dust. When word came to Achilles, he did not move, not at first, not until the air itself felt different, as if it had been emptied of warmth. He wept, not like a hero, not like a warrior, but like a boy who had lost the only person who saw through the armor. He returned to battle, not for glory, not for Helen, for him. He found Hector. There was no speech, no mercy. Achilles killed him and dragged his body behind his chariot again and again until the dust no longer rose. And still the grief did not lift. He held Patroclus's body for days, refused food, refused fire, until one night he dreamt the boy stood beside him again. "You must let me go," Patroclus said. And Achilles, for the first time, obeyed. He lit the pyre with shaking hands. And then he knew his end was near. For Achilles had been warned, if he went to Troy, he would win eternal fame, but he would die young. If he stayed, he would grow old, forgotten. He chose the first. An arrow came for him soon after, shot not by Hector, but by Paris, guided by a god. It struck the heel, the only part of him still mortal, the part his mother had held. He died without fanfare. They burned his body beside Patroclus's, and for centuries people tried to tell their story. Some made them lovers, some brothers, some warriors, but the truth is simpler. They were two boys who found each other in a world that did not promise kindness, and in war, in They remain side by side, even in death.
He wrote everything, Socrates had said, and then more. He built ideas into temples of thought. How the world might be ruled, how the soul might be shaped. What justice meant when no one taught. He imagined a cave where people saw only shadows and the painful journey it takes to see the fire behind them. He spoke of forms, of eternal truths beyond the touch of time. He taught others. Among them was Aristotle, younger, sharper, more concerned with the real than the ideal. Where Plato dreamt, Aristotle measured. He studied leaves and tides, the color of the sky before rain, the way a flute changes tone when your breath shifts. He wrote of logic, of biology. He classified animals, emotions, thoughts. He tutored a boy named Alexander, who would one day stretch Greece all the way to the edge of India. A boy who would conquer the known world, then weep when there was nothing left to conquer. But even as empires grew, Greece began to age. Not in weakness or weakness, for the gods were still worshipped, but not feared. The stars were charted. The body was studied. The mind was mapped like a city. Poets wrote of love and loss, not just war. Sappho wrote verses like falling leaves. Long bestays the voyaged only. But others now wrote of daily life, of longing glances and passing seasons. Tragedy and comedy shared the same stage. The theatres filled with people. The masks turned. And the chorus sang not of glory, but of choice. And in the countryside, in the small villages where time moved slower, old men sat beneath fig trees and told stories to children. Of heroes who once lived, of gods who once walked the earth, and the children listened. They knew these stories were old. They did not ask if they were true. They only asked for them again, and again, until the sun slipped below the mountains, and the sky turned the color of wine, and the voices faded like smoke. Time passed, as it always does, not in thunder but in the quiet way that olive trees grow and marble crumbles. Greece did not fall. It changed. The world around it shifted. New empires rose, louder, heavier. Rome borrowed its gods, gave them new names, but the soul of Hellas, the soft center of her stories, remained. The columns still cast long shadows in the afternoon light. The sea still whispered against the cliffs. Somewhere in the hills, goats still grazed where once Apollo's lyre might have echoed. Not always faithfully, but the names remained. Zeus, Athena, Achilles, Odysseus, Antigone, Socrates. Some were carved into stone, others whispered into poems, and some only spoken in a project, Socrates de Goethe. There were still temples, though their altars now gathered more dust than sacrifice. There were still theatres, though the gods in the plays had become metaphors, not beings. And in the houses of simple people, the old ways lingered. At dusk, women still lit small flames to Hestia, not out of religion, but out of rhythm. Men looked to the sea and gave a silent nod to Poseidon, not because they feared him, but because they understood respect. Hoping for dreams, knows or lay. The stories were not commandments. They were not dogma. They were comfort. They were ways to understand why the world broke sometimes and how people could still rise. Why love hurt? Why fate seemed cruel? Why the stars didn't answer? And why, even so, it mattered to Wangwu. It mattered to plant, to sing, to build, to ask. Not because it changed the gods, but because it made us more human. Now the columns stand quiet, their white surfaces worn smooth by centuries of wind and sun. The birds nest where Walwagudstesifilis. Tourists come with cameras, and guides speak in soft voices. But at night, when the gates are closed and the wind rises through the ruins, the place still breathes. If you listen closely, you might hear it. Not words, not music, just something moving, ancient and slow, like a thought too old to finish, like a question you once asked in a dream. The myths live on, not in marble, but in memory, not as answers, but as companions. You only need to have loved someone deeply, or lost something you cannot name, or walked alone and wondered where the road leads. That is enough. You're already part of the story. Night settles over what was once the world's brightest order. The hills are quiet now, and the cities, though still standing, speak in whispers. The people sleep in small homes, with clay roofs and olive oil lamps burning low. And in the silence between breaths, the old voices still echo. In a village somewhere in the Peloponnesus, an old man sits beside his hearth. His knees ache. His hands are knotted like old vines. He doesn't speak much anymore. But when his grandchildren beg him, with eyes wide and the grand way of orators, like someone who knows time has space for silence, he tells them how Athena was born from the head of Zeus, already armed, already wise. He tells them of Heracles, who once held up the sky, and of Prometheus, whose liver still grows each night. He tells them of Helen's face, of Apollo's bow, of Dionysus dancing through the vineyards with bare feet and wine-dark lips. But more than that, he tells them of gardens, of how the gods were not always watching from clouds, but walking under trees. He says he once saw Pan himself, or someone who might have been Pan, playing a reed pipe by a dry stream, just at the edge of a summer storm. The children believe him. The old man watches the coals. He does not need temples or incense or statues. He has memory, and that is enough. Far from this house, in the heart of an old ruined temple, the moonlight pours through a broken roof. A cat's lips bruised dies Vesnos. An owl sits atop a half-toppled capital, watching with eyes that seem older than the stars. Somewhere, water drips. Slow and patient, a rhythm untouched by centuries. The earth holds every step ever taken here. Somewhere at all, the volgende, waar we leeft off. Somewhere there is the trace of a tear from a woman who offered her prayer not to be answered, but simply to be heard. And above it all, the sky is vast and unchanging. The constellations still tell the stories. Orion still hunts, Cassiopeia still waits. And Heracles, the old hero, still leans against the curve of the heavens watching. You can lie under that sky now, just as the shepherds once did. You can close your eyes, and the myths will find you. They are not only in books or on marble, they are in the smell of time on your hands after you crush a leaf, in the crackle of dry grass underfoot, in the way someone you love calls your name when they think you're too far to hear. Greece never ended. It folded itself gently into the soul of the world, into the shape of our stories, into the music we hum without knowing why, into the part of the night that feels wider than the day. And now, as you rest, as the stories settle into your body like warmth under a blanket, know this: you've walked with gods tonight. You've stood beside warriors, climbed stone steps, followed threads through labyrinths. You've watched the sun rise over ruins and heard the sea whisper myths it's never forgotten. And now the fire is low. The wind is soft. The world is still. You may close your eyes. The story continues, but for now, you may sleep. Somewhere in a small village in the hills of Arcadia, morning begins not with a bell or command, but with the light. It seeps in through the open shutters, touches the worn stone floor, paints the clay walls gold. The roosters do not crow all at once. First one, then another, as if remembering slowly that the world must begin again. A woman rises. Her feet touch the cold floor. She wraps a cloth around her shoulders and steps outside. The air is clean, still a little damp with dew. The path from her doorway to the oven is made of pressed earth, scattered with petals fallen from the fig tree overhead. She gathers dry olive wood into a bundle, tucks it under her arm and lights the fire. The bread must rise. Inside, a girl begins to spin stir. Her spindle moves like a heartbeat, steady, patient, almost thoughtless. The fibers pull through her fingers, soft and uneven, and the thread grows longer as the sun climbs. She hums a tune older than words, something her grandmother sang when they sat like this, her hands just as brown. just as still. In the square, an old man sharpens a blade with slow circles against a stone. He does not speak. He watches the dust move across the flat. So two boys run past him, chasing a goat. The goat wins, not far away, under the long colonnade that shades the market. A potter turns his wheel. The clay on his hands is cool, and he works without looking, the shape rising with the rhythm of a breath. A jug, maybe, or a bowl. His fingers know what to do. The wheel turns. The vessel forms. And on the rim with his thumb, he presses a small, imperfect dent. Just enough so he'll know, years from now, that it was his. These people do not speak of gods aloud, but the reuse of Odysseus. In the way the mother lays a sprig of rosemary near the bread as it bakes, in the way the boy kisses his sister's forehead when he passes her on the way to the stream. In the way the potter hums the name of Athena under his breath before the kiln is lit. In Greece, the sacred is not far. It is folded into the small, the daily, the forgotten. And in the evening, when the sky begins to soften and the dust glows orange, not to watch, just to be. They speak little. Someone brings a wee. Someone laughs, and it sounds like a bird just before dark. The stars come out slowly. They are the same stars Homer saw. The same that looked down on Agamemnon's tents, and on the face of Eurydice when she turned. They are still here, and the people beneath them live not in the shadows of gods, but in their echoes. Children fall asleep on laps. Old women tuck shawls around their knees. The goats settle near the door, and the stories, the real ones, are not shouted. They are murmured. Once, in this very grove, a satyr danced in the rain. Your great-grandmother met a man who claimed to be Hermes in disguise. I saw a woman once in the river who had no shadow. No one asks for proof, because proof was never the point. In the sight of a V. The point is to remember that the world is not only what we see, but beneath the skin of every olive tree, and under the dust on every stone, and in the breath before the song begins, something old is waiting. And when you sleep, when your breath deepens, and your limbs grow heavy, and the night gathers around your dreams, you carry those stories with you, not as knowledge, but as warmth. They are not there to explain the world, they are there to make it beautiful. The night in Greece does not fall all at once. It thickens like warm oil poured slowly across the sky. The hills dim first, their outlines melting into violet. Then the trees, cypress and olive, become silhouettes. His amphorae, his cups, his oil flasks. To temples and homes, where no one knows the shape of his face, but knows the shape of his hands. The floor of his workspace is packed to earth. The wheel stands in the center, low to the ground, its base blackened by years of damp and ash. He sits cross-legged before it, his knees folded like wings, his back bent not from age but from long practice. His hands are large, rough at the fingertips, soft at the palms, stained with the memory of ochre and iron. He begins early. Before the sun hits the doorway, before the dust in the air turns gold, he wets the clay with rainwater caught in a broken cistern. He says, "Mouthkvav." Rainwater is kinder. It listens better. The clay is not just dug. It is kneaded like bread. It is folded, slapped, turned. He speaks to it, not in words, but in hums and breaths. He places it on the wheel and begins to spin. The motion is gay. The wheel turns. The clay begins to rise beneath his fingers, guided not by force, but by suggestion. He does not grip. He coaxes. The walls of the vessel lift, tremble, widen, narrow. His hands shape the lip, the belly, the neck. The form appears, but revealed. The wheelie. There is silence in the room. Only the soft whir of the wheel. Only the occasional sound of a fingernail grazing the surface. Only the breath of a man at work. Beside him, a boy watches, his nephew maybe, or an apprentice from another veer. He watches the hands, the wrists, the exact moment when pressure shifts, when water is added, when speed is slowed. He is learning not the technique, but the attention. The way the potter never looks away. The way he listens, not with ears, but with fingers. Once the form is finished, it is lifted with a piece of string from the wheel. It is placed on a board to dry. The shape is still soft, still uncertain, still becoming. Later, when the sun is higher, and the air begins to smell of dust and goatskin, the potter takes a brush, made it subtle. Wash. He mixes his pigments, red from iron, black from smoke and vinegar, white from crushed shells. He dips the brush into the bowl and begins to paint. Not decoration, not ornament, memory. He paints a story. A young man holding a lyre, a woman with a water jug. A lion crouching behind a tree, a sailing ship with curved eyes at its prow, a simple hand reaching toward another. These are not gods, these are not myths. These are his neighbors, his family, his own dreams. The line of the brush is steady, unbroken. There is no sketch. He knows the rhythm like a poem told too many times to forget. His wrist moves. The jar begins to speak, and when it is dry, he carries it to the kiln. The kiln is not beautiful. It is squat, wide-mouthed, rimmed with ash and soot. But it holds fire. Inside, stacked carefully, the vessels wait. The flames are fed slowly. Wood, straw, olive pits. The heat rises. The colours deepen. The clay hardens. The potter watches the smoke. He does not speak during firing. He waits, and when the fire is done, he does not terrace. He lets the kiln cool overnight, then opens it like a letter he wrote to himself the day before. Some pieces crack, some darken wrong, some sing. He selects the best and places them in a basket lined with wool. Tomorrow he will carry them to the agora. The dirt does not fully come off. It never has. The stain of clay is not grime. It is history. It is choice. It is a life. And in another part of the village, under a stretched linen awning, a woman dies. She has pots set over small fires, each filled with water, and plants she gathered herself. Madder root for red, woad leaves for blue, onion skin for gold, walnut hulls for brown. The dye bath simmers. The steam rises with the smell of earth and rain. She lowers the thread in gently. It soaks, it changes. She watches, waits, stirs. She tests the tone on a scrap of linen. Not yet. Hung in the shade to dry. The sun would bleach it. Patience makes the colour last. She dyes not for fashion, not for beauty. For ritual, for identity, for meaning. A red sash for her daughter's marriage. A blueden veil for the harvest. A black scarf for a neighbour who buried her father last week. Each colour tells a story. Each story folds into the cloth. These are not hobbies. They are memory given form. And Greece is full of them. Not in hands that spin, that sew, that fire. That's in fingers that turn raw material into language without words. Circle of young boys stretches under the late afternoon sun. The teacher walks among them, not a soldier, not a priest, but a Padé tribes, a trainer of bodies and minds. He carries a staff, not for striking, but for pointing, for correcting the angle of an arm, the curve of a spine. They are not Aegean Sea. They begin with breath. The teacher speaks slowly, with the calm precision of someone who knows that every motion begins in the lungs. He tells them to inhale through the nose, to let the air sink into their bellies, not their chests. He waits. Then the exhale. Like wind across a grain field. Then they move, not abruptly, not for speed, but in shapes. One lifts a leg, bends his knee, holds it at a right angle while balancing on the other foot. Another extends both arms in opposite directions, fingers wide. Labyrinths udafusan. Uzun. These are not acrobatics. They are grammar, taught through muscle. To be Greek is not only to think or to speak, but to move with meaning. Even in silence, the body must carry logos. Later, they will run, they will wrestle, they will throw. But first, they must understand where their center lies, where power begins, where balance lives. And just over the hill, in a dusty clearing, ringed by olive trees, a group of young women practices dance. Not for courtship, not for ritual. Ambience. Rivers. They dance in a slow circle, barefoot in the soil, their arms rising and falling like the sea. They wear simple garments tied at the waist, with soft ropes dyed with saffron. Their hair is braided, not for beauty, but to keep it from their eyes as they turn. Halfway there, one step, then another, a turn, a pause, a foot brushed against the ground. They are telling a story of planting, of loss, of waiting, of return. The dance is not choreographed. It is inherited from priestess to initiate. Not a do in spraat face. Each step carries a season. Each movement answers a question. When they stop, it is not because the music ends. It is because the story has been told. Further inland, in a gymnasium near the river, older boys wrestle. Not with coups de verre. The sand beneath them is warm, their bodies slick with oil, muscles taut but not tense. They grip each other not to break, but to test, to read. Each shift of weight, each flick of the wrist, each slide of the heel across the dirt is a sentence exchanged. They learn where weakness hides. And how strength can be gentle. The instructor does not shout. He watches, and when he speaks in proverbs. The tree that bends does not break. The hand that knows where to touch does not need to strike hard. Later, they will sit together beneath the shade of a fig tree and rub their skin with smooth stones, scraping away the sweat and oil and sand. The tree do not do, only a feeling of how the body learns what the mind forgets. Athletic games begin not only in Olympia, but in every place where people gather with open hearts and strong limbs. Long jump, javelin, discus running and wrestling joined into one demanding test. And each event is not about domination, it is about form, about poise. And as am I. A discus throw that flies far, but lands awkwardly is less praised than one that spins like poetry. In Greece, competition is not destruction, it is revelation, a chance to see who you are when the body is honest. And then, When the night comes, when the work ends and the meals have been eaten and the children washed and the oil lamps lit, then the theatre begins, not in grand marble spaces only. In courtyards, in orchards, in the hollow places between trees. The actually Sadio will read in Fay. The chorus steps forward, not individuals, but one voice made of many. They sing of fate, of choice, of the gods who watch, of the men and women who love, fall, break, and remember. The play is not fantasy, it is mirror, and the people watch. Not what's ball? Tears are not rare, neither is silence, for in those hours, when the world is turned into story, when the stage becomes a threshold, the Greeks do not escape life. They meet it, full, bare, and without fear. And when the final line is spoken, and the masks removed, and the torches dimmed, they rise. Not to applause, but to reflection. They walk home slowly, speaking quietly, not of the actors, but of what they felt. Not when they forth to, through forth, moving for the very film. Not when a hand lifts a cup. Not when a dancer turns once, twice, then stops with her arms outstretched. It is always carrying something. Memory, meaning. The soul shaped into gesture. The Greek house does not impress at first glance. From the outside, it is low, square, often unpainted. Its walls are made of sun-dried brick, whitewashed in places, and dreams. There are no columns here, no grandeur. It stands close to the earth, like something grown rather than built. But step through the narrow doorway, and you enter another world. The air inside is cooler, quieter. The floor is packed earth or smooth stone, swept clean each morning with a broom made of olive branches. The light enters not through great windows, but through small, high openings that let in the sun softly, never harshly. It falls in angled lines across the floor, catching on pottery, on baskets, on the folds of cloth laid over a wooden stool. The heart of the home is the courtyard. An open space in the center, beneath the sky, where light gathers and rain sometimes falls. Around it are rooms, some wide, some narrow, some barely large enough for a bed and a chest. But this central court is where life collects. A vine climbs along one wall, a fig tree grows in a square cut into the ground. A clay basin sits beside it, where children wash their hands before meals, where a woman pours out wine for the household gods. Pigeons rest on the tiles. A cat walks along the edge of the roof, tail swaying. In the morning, sunlight spills over sage dew. Worried sir, as rees is there. By afternoon, there is shadow enough for a nap. In one corner of the courtyard is the kitchen. Not a room, but a space. Sometimes open, sometimes covered with a cloth awning. The hearth is a circle of stones blackened by years of smoke. Sometimes with those There is no chimney, only the memory of fire in the rafters. The walls are darkened where steam has kissed them. On a shelf, lined with broken tiles, sit clay jars. One for oil, one for nothing yet, just waiting. The cook. Often the mother, sometimes a servant, sometimes the eldest daughter, works without fuss. She does not measure. She does not consult scrolls. Her hands know the weight of flour. Her eyes know the shimmer of water when it's owned. She cooks the crackle of onions in oil, the hush of bread baking beneath the ash. She tastes with her fingers. The bread is round, coarse, made from barley and rye. The olives are wrinkled, rich with salt. The cheese is wrapped in fig leaves, still cool from the cellar. And when the meal is ready, it is served not on polished platters, but on plates fired in the very same village, painted perhaps by a cousin, or by someone remembered only by the tilt of their signature on the bottom. They eat sitting on mats or low stools. There is no head of the table. There is often no table at all. Food is shared. Bread is broken, not cut. Water is poured into each other's cups before one's own is filled. Children eat beside elders. No one eats in silence, but no one shouts. There is a saying within a saying, a music not made of instruments, but of gesture. When the meal is done, the bowls are washed at the basin with water poured by hand, rubbed with sand or ash, rinsed again. They dry in the sun. The scraps go to the chickens. Nothing is wasted. Not food, not time, not care. Amaz est ananda may. Inside the home, the rooms are small but full. A sleeping space has woven mats, rolled up each morning. A chest holds spare tunics, stitched and restitched, smelling faintly of bay leaves and cedar. On the wall hangs a small wooden image of a god, perhaps Hermes for luck, perhaps Hestia for the hearth. Nearby, a bundle of dried herbs hangs from a nail. Sage, thyme, maybe pennyroyal, to keep insects away, and spears into womb. It stands like a quiet animal in the corner, tall and upright. Its threads in various states of becoming. No one touches it without purpose. Here, patterns are born. Robes, veils, blankets, each one a testament to the time it takes to make something last. In another room, perhaps a small one, with a window barely wider than a hand, a man keeps his tools. A chisel, a knife, a bundle of papyrus. It is ruin. This is where he copies verses, or sharpens blades, or sits in the half-light thinking of nothing and everything at once. The house is not large, but it holds multitudes. It holds birth and grief, laughter and argument. It holds the soft sound of a mother, brushik furvies, the click of a spindle, the drip of water into a basin at night. It holds echoes of voices that once called to someone in the next room, now gone, of sandals dropped by the door, waiting for feet that won't return, but for for continuity. Its roof, and above it all, always, the sky. The roof is flat. At night, the family might climb up, lay out mats, and sleep under the stars. The wind moves more freely up there. The smells of the town, bread, figs, smoke, rise and mingle. Someone else watches the constellations. Someone arbiti with me. Reese though booze. The house is not grand, but it is complete. It is not just a shelter. It is a body. It breathes, it remembers. And in Greece, that is all you need to belong. At the edge of the city, beyond the market stalls and olive groves, past the last houses with smoke, curling gently from their rooftops, stands the temple. It does not rise suddenly from the earth. Its steps are worn smooth, molto des des Zeus. Feet that have climbed them with hope, with sorrow, with offerings in hand and silence in their mouths. The columns are thick, not decorative, but weight-bearing. They hold not just the marble roof, but centuries of belief. Their fluted grooves are filled with dust and path. This is not a place of thunder. This is a place of rhythm. The day begins early here. Before the sun crests the hills, before even the farmers rouse their animals, the first fire is lit. Not large, not loud. A slow kindling of olive wood, fed carefully by the temple attendant, whose name is never spoken during service. He moves barefoot, his tunic tied tight against the morning chill, his hands blackened from years of tending smoke. He knows Wisnav. He knows which embers to save. In the inner chamber, where few are ever permitted, a young priestess walks softly across the cool stone. She carries a small jar of water, drawn from a spring hidden deep in the hills, collected in silence before dawn. She sprinkles it across the threshold, then onto the altar. Her movements are practiced, reverent, not dramatic, not ceremonial for show, but intimate. The kind of ritual that becomes part of muscle memory, like breathing. She wears white linen and simple hoof. Around her wrist is a thin cord dyed with saffron, a mark of her vow. Her hair is braided and coiled at the base of her skull, pinned with a carved wooden stick passed down through 4 generations. It is not gold, it is not ornament, but it is sacred orb lu. As the sun climbs, the outer courtyard begins to fill. Pigeons flutter down from the roof. A goat bleats softly from beyond the gate. Merchants leave small offerings, a handful of wheat to coin, a twist of wool, not to gain favour, it vil you. Children run past with sticky fingers from figs, chased by older sisters, who have already been told twice not to shout near the sanctuary. One woman kneels by the outer column and places a honey cake at its base. She murmurs something. It is not a prayer in form. Between her and the goddess, who knows what she carries in her stomach, the pain, the waiting, the uncertain shape of new life. The priests begin their rounds, not in robes of splendor, but in linen tunics faded by sun and time. They greet visitors, not with quiet presence. They direct the elderly to shaded benches. They help a traveler tie his sandal strap. They do not ask names. They do not offer promises. They are bridges, not answers. At midday, the sacrificial table is prepared, but not as one might imagine. No dramatic spectacle. A lamb is brought forward, its wool brushed clean, its eyes covered with cloth. The knife is sharp. The moment is swift. The blood is caught in a clay bowl, which is then poured out with care upon the altar. The meat will be roasted, the skin cured. Nothing is wasted. The goddess take the essence. The people take the rest. Behind the temple, in the service quarters, a group of older women prepare the meal. They work together in quiet rhythm, washing herbs, grinding barley, stirring pots of lentils, flavored with garlic and mint. They får det shius bether de verve. They do not need to speak. The pot clicks. The bread rises. The steam fogs the corners of the open window, and when the food is ready, it is set not on banquet tables, but in wooden bowls placed carefully along the low wall where those in need notice. But the hungry are not forgotten. As the sun begins to fall, the temple turns golden. The flutes begin, not loud but like a breeze through reeds. One of the priestesses stands at the eastern edge of the courtyard, not embellished. She does not know who first sang them. No one does. They are simply part of the place now, like the cracks in the marble. People gather, not because they must, but because something in them leans toward the sound. A child sits cross-legged. A farmer leans on his staff. A Odysseus spoath. The music is not entertainment. It is alignment. Of breath, of silence, of presence. And as night falls, the fire is lowered. The goddess, or the god, depending on the place, is left in quiet, not abandoned, simply trusted that the Datsunlulas et the light, that the sacred exists without supervision. In the final hour, a priest walks once more through the stone halls, touches the wall with his palm, checks that the lamps are low, that the offerings are gathered, that the silence is clean. It rests. Beneath the stars, beneath the scent of burnt myrrh and olive ash, beneath the slow turning of a world that still remembers how to bow its head. Before the city wakes, before the olive presses begin their hum, before the ovens are lit and the looms start to creak, the harbour is already alive. It begins in the dark. Not full dark, the kind just before the sun, where the sky is no longer black, but not before the moon. A grey that carries sound further, a grey that tastes like salt, On the docks, men move slowly, not because they are lazy, but because the sea demands patience. There is no use rushing in a place where time is measured by tide, not by hour. Ropes are coiled, road YouTube starry. Nets are untangled, their weights clinking like distant bells. The boats are small, low, narrow, some made of pine, some of cypress, patched and repatched until the wood remembers every wave. Rave a wood for a wood for it wave. He steps carefully, toes gripping the grain of the wood, avoiding the slippery places where algae blooms green and sly. He knows this place like his own hands. He was raised among these ropes and salt barrels, between stacks of amphorae and rows of half-mended sails. His uncle is already at the edge of the pier, squatting beside a pile of fish, silver, stiff, glistening. The catch is good today: squid, bream, red mullet. He picks up each one with fingers that smell permanently of sea and iron. He inspects them by eye, not to admire, but to guess which will sell first, and which must go into stew before the sun is too high. The first buyers arrive with woven baskets, their sandals dusted white from limestone roads. They barter, not loudly, quietly, with small nods and half smiles. Fish is not luxury, it is necessity. It must be fresh. It must be fast. Beyond the fishermen, the shipwrights are already at work. Vives pour versa. Not building great warships or merchant vessels today, but repairing the everyday. The cracked hull of a family skiff, the broken oar of a trader's boat, the worn tiller of a ferry that crosses the same inlet. Their tools are simple: an adze, a bow drill, a chisel, but their hands are not. Their hands know wood, the way poets know silence. They knock along the planks listening for hollow sounds that betray rot. They smooth surfaces with surfaces novae. They argue about pine versus fir, about how long to season timber before it can be trusted. In the shipyard, there is a smell like no other. Salt, tar, wet rope, fresh wood, sweat, time. The men who work here live with splinters beneath their skin. They bleed into sword eyes. They swear requires of it than They eat flatbread with garlic and onions, and drink watered wine from shared jugs. At noon, they lie in the shadow of unfinished hulls, their bodies resting against beams that will soon cut through waves. And down on the shore, the children gather shells and stories. They build cities out of sand and crush sea urchins under stones. They run into the foam with shrieks of daring, and tumble back with mouths full of laughter and salt water. One of them finds a fish skeleton, bleached white and still perfect. He holds it up like a relic. They passed us around. No one speaks. It is beautiful. Farther out, the open sea glitters. Boats rise and fall, barely visible against the shimmer. Their sails catch the wind in curves that look like breath. Some head for nearby islands. Others disappear entirely, vanishing into the place where the sky and water become one endless threshold. Every sailor knows the danger. The sea is not cruel. It is indifferent. It remembers nothing. It forgives nothing. It simply is. They sail not because it is safe, but because it is necessary. Because the islands must trade. Because fish feed cities. Because coral lies in caves that only they can reach. Because some things, like purple dye, or distant stories, or missing suns, are worth the risk. In the tavern, just above the docks, the first songs. A voice like cracked leather, a chorus of hands on wood. They sing of storms and safe returns, of women who wait, of wine that tastes like the sea. The words are old, the melody older, but the feeling is always new. Someone else lifts a net of ice, lampland. A man lifts. Someone watches the horizon, still waiting. And all around them, the harbour lives. It exhales, it remembers, it continues. In a village courtyard shaded by a pomegranate tree, a child sits cross-legged in the dust. The stones beneath him. His fingers are busy, not with toys, but with 2 round pebbles and a piece of string. He ties, unties, wraps, unwinds. He's not trying to make anything. He's listening to the way the world feels when your mind isn't yet filled with names. His sister crouches nearby, drawing spirals in the dirt with a stick. Her curls fall into her eyes. She doesn't brush them away. She's focused. The spiral grows, turning inward, then back out again, like a shell or a whisper in flight. No one tells a steer to spooze. No one tells them to hurry. In Greece, children are not rushed into usefulness. They are watched, yes, with the corner of the eye, with the tilt of a head from the doorway. But they are not pushed. They are trusted to find rhythm on their own. In the morning, they help with small things. Frevis vea vesi. Folding linens, filling the water jar, feeding the goats. If the goats are in the mood, they learn to knead dough, not by being taught, but by standing close enough to their mother's elbow that their hands start to mimic hers without realizing. They ask questions when they want to. When they don't, no one presses them. At festivals they watch, eyes wide, faces half hidden behind their father's cloak or their grandmother's sleeve. The songs, the torches, the circles of dancers. It all goes in without explanation. Later, in a quiet moment, they'll ask, why do we light the fire here? Or, Alison do, as? And someone will answer, gently, maybe not fully, just enough. Learning is not delivered to children here. It unfolds around them. And the old, the elders, the wrinkled, the slowed, are not left behind. They are not closed away in shadowed rooms. And the oldies, they are not made irrelevant by their distance from labor. In fact, the less they do with their bodies, the more they are expected to do with their presence. On any given day, you might find an old woman seated just inside the doorway of a home, her legs wrapped in thick wool, her hair bound back in a scarf the colour of baked clay. She holds a spindle, but she's not really spinning. Her fingers move from memory. What she really offers is her witnessing. You thee? She has seen 5 generations born, and she remembers the name of the goat that saved a harvest by giving birth during a drought. When she speaks, the room quiets, not because she commands it, but because her words arrive slowly. Nearby, under a tree whose bark he carved 60 years ago, an old man sharpens a knife that hasn't cut anything in weeks. It doesn't matter. The rhythm is what counts. The scrape, the pause, the glance up at the mountains. Doing this beside his own. Children approach him, one by one, not for stories, not yet. When the story does come, sometimes whispered, sometimes with a sudden laugh, before the new road, before the olive tree by the well died, before your father learned to whistle, he doesn't tell these stories for the children's sake. He tells them for the stones. Because the world needs to be reminded it's been held before. And sometimes, in the evening, the youngest and the oldest sit beside one another without a word. Neither looks at the other with the same patience. They rest in a silence that is not awkward, but ancestral. Between them flows the time of the household, of the land. And when night falls, the children are not told stories to put them to sleep. They are told them to guide their dreams. Not to end the day, but to continue it into another kind of seeing. They lie on mats on the roof or in the cool inner rooms, and someone sits near and begins with a simple line. The old man nearby listens too, and in that moment, the space between beginning and ending vanishes, because in Greece, the children are the beginning, and the old are the return, and together they hold the middle. It begins not with a trumpet or decree, but with a shift. The wind smells different. A little heavier. The sky turns a sharper shade of blue, not brighter, but deeper. Startaloo. Platters are scrubbed. Lamps are polished. The old table is brought out from the back of the storeroom and set beneath the fig tree. A festival is coming. In the hills, the shepherds bring their flocks down early. Their coats are trimmed. Their bells are oiled, so they ring clearly. In the square, women begin to knead larger amounts of dough, adding cinnamon, dried fruit, and orange peel. Men carry branches from the olive groves and stack them in neat piles for the fire that will burn through the night. Children are sent to gather laurel and rosemary. There is no central announcement, no list of events. Everyone already knows. The preparations are both chaotic and perfectly choreographed. Every gesture echoes something ancient. The bread shaped in coils, like snakes or rivers, or the goddess's hair. The wine stored in shadow 3 months ago, now finally ready. The dancers practicing barefoot in dust, learning the pattern of turns by the movement of each other's shoulders. And then the dee, fine as arts, the earth. At sunset, the first torch is lit at the altar near the old olive tree. Not the grandest tree, not the largest, but the oldest. It bears only a few olives now, but no one dares cut it. It leans, cracked and hollow, but it stands. The torch is not thrown. It is passed from hand to hand until it reaches the center of the courtyard, where a ring of stones marks the sacred hearth. There it is placed. The fire takes slowly. It catches the herbs, the thin, kindling, then the thicker branches. Soon the flames are high, licking the sky, and the shadows begin to dance. This is the moment when the festival truly begins. People do not wait for instruction. They begin to sing. The song is not uniform. It starts in pieces. A low hum from an old man. A line of melody from a child. A rhythm clapped by a woman whose hands smell of lemon and oil. Slowly it builds. It finds shape. Soon the whole square is filled with it. Overlapping, imperfect, but whole, and the dancers in tea. They wear simple clothes, but marked. A sash here, a wreath of oak leaves there, a painted line across the cheek. These are not costumes, they are signs. A girl with red bands around her wrists represents the fields. As the river will build Ephes Minchas. An old woman moves slowly, her hands outstretched, embodying the past, not as memory, but as living thread. They do not perform, they reenact the planting, the waiting, the first rains, the hunger, the return. Each movement is part of a greater sentence, one written in feet and fingers, in circles and spirals. Around them, the villagers form a ring. Some join in, some simply watch. But no one is outside of it. Even the ones who sit in shadow are part of the shape. För why niet is oss hoorde Vivan. The laughter so loud it startles the dogs. Plates are passed hand to hand. Figs, olives, salted cheese, honeyed barley, jugs of wine passed without counting. Someone makes a toast, not loud, just enough to carry. To the ones who came before, to the ones still arriving. To our men. To the ones who never left. Later in the night, the rituals begin. These are not secret, but they are quieter. A priestess leads a small lamp, Each carries a small lamp. They do not speak. They collect synopsis. They drop flower petals, basil, myrtle, and thyme, into the current, whispering names into the darkness. Names of the dead, names of the lost, names of things that still matter but cannot be seen. At the same time, by the fire, a man sings a story. It begins before the gods were named. It moves through creation, through betrayal, through silence, through love. Children fall asleep during it. Elders close their eyes. The fire crackles. The night listens, and still the festival continues. Someone begins another round of dance. A girl sings to the moon. A boy sleeps with his head in his grandmother's lap. Two old friends argue about who danced better last year. A goat walks between benches as if inspecting the offerings. At dawn, the fire is still burning. Lower now. Sonia burn. The square is covered in footprints and fig skins. Empty jugs and laughter turn to memory. No one cleans yet. The morning belongs to the stillness, to the echo of what was said, to the warmth of the earth still holding the heat of the night. The festival to the full spirit of fate. It has simply folded itself into the bones of the place. Into the ashes of the fire that will be relit next season. Because in Greece, a festival is not a performance. That life, when shared, becomes myth. The beginning of Greece, as we know it, does not come with trumpets or temples. Small vessels, stone planks, sails made from flax that still smell faintly of field. They carry people. Not armies, not merchants, but families, searching for land that doesn't flood every spring. They arrive on rocky coasts, climb hills, look out across the sea, and begin again. Before Athens, before Sparta, before Homer, there the worthy were through Balti. On the island of Crete, where the light is clearer than elsewhere, they built cities that did not look like fortresses. No high walls, no towers. Their palaces opened inward, around open courtyards full of light and colour. At Knossos, the walls were painted with dolphins. Leaping girls' bulls mid-flight. Life did not crouch there, it danced. She was of the earth, the body, the harvest, the blood. Festivals were held with music, with movement, with offerings of grain and oil, with children leaping over bulls in acts not of cruelty, but of skill, of ritual, of contact between fear and grace. Then came Zeus. She, though, on the mainland, where the land rises more steeply and the skies are harder. They built with stone so heavy people later thought it must have been placed by giants. Cyclopean walls, they called them. Cities like Mycenae, Tiryns, Zeus. Here, kings ruled from megarans, great central halls, dark and smoky, with fire at the center and painted lions on the walls. They buried their dead in deep shafts, with gold masks pressed over their faces. They wrote too, in Linear B, a script scratched into clay tablets and baked by accident in fire. Not poetry, not myth, inventories. Lists of grain, tools, slaves, the machinery of power already humming. From these people, the epics would later be drawn. Visser, they rost Wiese. Agamemnon, Menelaus, Odysseus, Achilles. Their names are remembered not because they ruled, but because their stories were told when everything else had turned to ash. And turn to ash it did. No one knows exactly how. Perhaps it was invasion, perhaps earthquake, drought, rebellion. But by 1100 BCE, the palaces were burned, the tablets forgotten, and the world shrunk. Greece entered what later writers would call a dark age. But darkness is not always emptiness. Villages still learned the names of stars. And somewhere, on a coast, in a cave, by a shepherd's fire, someone began to tell a story about a great city with high walls, a stolen queen, and a wooden horse. From silence, song returned, and when it did, it found a new shape. By the 8th century BCE, Greece was no longer a land of kings, but of cities. Small, self-governed, stubborn, proud, each with its own walls, its own patron deity, its own festivals, laws, alliances, betrayals. Polis, the Greek city-state, was not just geography. It was Odysseus, Zeus, Tuzou, D. The most famous of these were Athens and Sparta, and they could not have been more different. Athens built itself on speech. Its citizens, at least the free male ones, gathered to argue, to debate, to vote, to shape the laws they lived by. Its streets rang with words, in the agora, in the courts, in the assembly. From this clamour emerged democracy, fragile and imperfect, but revolutionary. They built with marble, but they trusted in thought. Meanwhile, Sparta looked inward. It built no walls, because at birth, every citizen trained for war. Boys were taken from home at 7, raised by the state, taught to endure, to obey, to fight, not for glory, for order, for Sparta. Their lives were austere, their words few, but their will unshakable. He married an Afghan princess. He demanded worship. Like an Eastern god-king, and his men grumbled but followed, he stood at the edge of the known world and wept, not because he had no more lands to conquer. That's a later myth. But because the sea ahead of him whispered of a world he would never touch. And then he died. No one knows how. Fever? Poison? Fate? Its empire shattered. And then he's Ichi. But the world he shaped did not. This was the beginning of the Hellenistic Age, a time when Greek culture was no longer bounded by Greek land. Athens still stood, Sparta still trained. But now, Greek was spoken in the markets of Alexandria in Egypt, in the libraries of Pergamon, in the courts of Seleucid kings who ruled what had once been Persia. Greek sculptors carved statues for foreign gods. Greek astronomers watched with 5 V, and in Alexandria, under a lighthouse that stood taller than any built before, a library grew. It was said to hold every book in the world. They copied scrolls brought in by ships. They preserved knowledge, not to worship it, but to use as store. Here, Euclid wrote of geometry. Archimedes dreamed of levers and spheres. Herophilos cut open the human body and dared to ask how it worked. Philosophy continued too. The Stoics taught that peace comes not from control, but from a tune, ha, thistoe, to readers philosopist, math, die. The Epicureans believed pleasure is not excess, but the absence of pain, and in the streets, beyond the lecture halls and porticos, people still lived simply, selling fish, weaving cloth, telling stories to their children, as the oil lamps flickered low. Greece, by this time, had become less a place, and more a language, a style, a mindset. It travelled with books, with coins, with travellers, but not forever free. Because far to the west a new power had risen, not philosophical, not first Thursday, had marred They copied their gods, renamed their myths, read their plays. Wealthy Romans hired Greek statues. They spoke Latin in the Senate, but they thought in Greek in their million. In 146 BCE, they destroyed Corinth, a city of marble, music, and defiance. They killed, burned, enslaved. And the world understood Greece was no longer its own master. Athens survived. Barely, its theatres still hosted plays. Its terrace und but the days of Pericles, of glory, of ships and votes and festivals that shook the ground, they were gone. Now, Greece was a province, a jewel, a museum, a memory. But even then, it endured. Because Greece had always been more than its walls. It was its words. Its deep, stubborn belief that the world could be known. That truth mattered. That beauty was worth the time it took to carve into stone. And so the empire passed, but the story remained, written in marble, sung in verses, taught in cities far from Athens, in Rome, in Constantinople, in Cairo, in Florence, in Oxford, in the mind of a student listening now, perhaps far from Greece, but close to its soul. Because to speak of courage, to ask what justice is, to tell a child of stars and monsters and olive trees, that still is Greek. Greece did not end. It softened. It folded itself into the corners of history, like the last note of a lyre, still veiled. The cities that once rang with speeches and song still stand, though quieter. In Athens, the wind moves through broken columns with the same dignity it once carried through the robes of philosophers. The stones are warm by day, cool by night. Pigeons nest where once senators argued the fate of men and gods. The marble crumbles, the paint fades, but something remains. Not the empire, not the battles, not even the names, but the shape of thought. The feeling that life is something you can ask questions about. That beauty matters. Not because it lasts, but because it shows us the truth, even briefly, that even when everything is uncertain, the harvest, the sea, the future, it is still worthwhile to build to cause we, discern even less. In a small village on a hillside that never made it into the scrolls of history, a woman wakes before dawn and lights a lamp. Not because of ritual, because her mother did, and hers before. She walks to her courtyard and waters the basil. Russet calls war. Nymph for. A goat shifts its weight. A child stirs. She has never read Plato. She has never seen the Parthenon. But when she tells her daughter, later that night, a story about a man who tried to fly too close to the sun, and another who listened to music from the underworld, she does not know it, but she is preserving a civilization, not by duty, by living they saties shiot chidi. Far away, in a library, someone opens a book bound in cracked leather, the letters inside twist and turn. Ancient Greek, inked by a monk who did not know the words, only that they were worth copying. The reader frowns, sounds out a line, and suddenly hears a voice, centuries old, asking, "What is the good life?" In a schoolroom, a teacher draws a triangle on the board and says, "Pythagoras." The name is a relic, the numbers are clean. But somewhere, in the back of the room, a child wonders why the angle of a corner should matter so much. And that small, inexplicable curiosity is Greek. In a theatre, a playwright rewrites Antigone, a prison, or a cough at Sainsbury's. The audience sits in the dark, breath held, and hears, once again, a voice say, "I was not born to share in hate, but in love." And someone cries, not because the story is new, but because it still knows how to reach us. This is the legacy, not timelines. Not ruins photographed by tourists, but questions that do not fade, and silence that still holds shape. When you walk through Greece today, you walk through layers. Beneath your feet, crushed pottery, forgotten bones, the outline of a street that once echoed with sandals' songs, sellers calling out prices. Above you, sky that watched gods and wolves, lovers and thinkers, farmers and fools. The same moon. What is courage? What is justice? What is love? And why does beauty matter, even when everything else changes? In the end, perhaps Greece was never meant to be one place. one time, one people. Perhaps it was always meant to travel, to break apart, to seed itself in every tongue that learns its words, in every mind that dares to wander, in every heart that cannot bear to live without poetry. And so, my dear listener, wherever you are, whatever time it is as you hear these last words, know this: you have walked with the Valley. Through its fields, its myth, its kitchens, its temples, its ships, its fires. You have sat beside its children, learned from its elders, danced in its streets, asked its questions. And though the fire is low now, and the sky outside is heavy with stars, Greece, Anusbury, not in the past, in you. Greece did not leave us, it changed shape. You can find it today not in monuments, but in the way people think, speak, calculate, imagine, describe the world. It lingers in the roots of language, the structure of logic, the silhouette of a theatre stage, the curve of an amphora, a question mark at the end of a sentence. Walk into any modern library and you walk into a Greek invention. The idea of categorizing knowledge, of preserving written thought across generations, of arguing with books. This was not born in marble halls, but in minds trained by dialogues. In the echo of Socratic, in the scribes of Alexandria, who died saving scrolls that no longer exist, but whose impulse to protect meaning is with us still. Mathematics, too, bears their fingerprint. When you draw a triangle, you are repeating gestures first made on sand with sticks. When you calculate the distance between stars, you are walking the same arc once walked by men who measured the circumference of the earth using only shadows. Geometry, algebra, astronomy all have roots that stretch back to the chalky hillsides of Ionia, where thinkers paced in tunics and asked not what is this, but why is this? The Hippocratic Oath, still sworn by doctors, comes from a man who believed illness was not a punishment from the gods, but a natural event, that the body could be understood, treated, respected. And so today, in white-lit clinics and vast hospitals, surgeons touch instruments designed with principles older than their names. The scalpel, the diagnosis, the pulse, all carry whispers of Greece, and in the arts, the echo is even clearer. The arc of a narrative, the very concept of drama, conflict, choice, catharsis. It is not just entertainment, it is ritual. Whether on a Broadway stage in a black box theatre in Berlin, or in a school auditorium, when the lights dim and the actors breathe in before the first line, they stand not alone, but with Dionysus behind the curtain. The Olympic Games, the Lyceum. The Encyclopedia, the Museum. Rouse Wolf. The theatre. Even the word school comes from the Greek sokon, which meant leisure, not labor. To the Greeks, learning was not a means to an end, but a way of living with purpose, awareness and clarity. It was the permission to omission Teresa, To say, I do not know but I want to. To say, what if the stars are not gods but something else? To say, what makes a life good? Not for kings or heroes, but for me. Here, now. In that, Greece was not just the beginning of a conversation. One that never really ended. It survived the fall of Athens, the rise of Rome, the burning of Alexandria, the silence of the Middle Ages. It resurfaced in the Renaissance, flowed through the Enlightenment, shaped constitutions, philosophies, paintings, protests. It's in the ink of every pen that writes with doubt. Not in the past, but in the part of the world that keeps asking questions. In every moment where someone turns away from noise and chooses to listen instead. At this hour, the world does not sleep all at once. It withdraws. Light fades from the edge of the horizon, like ink pulled slowly from cloth. The birds go quiet, but not at the same moment. One by the fig tree, another on the ridge above the vineyard, then another farther off. Their silence comes in layers. The wind settles lower in the grass. A dog curls against a stone still warm from the day. Somewhere in a courtyard, a clay cup rests on its side, forgotten by someone who meant to pick it up but never did. And in a small room with thick walls and a low roof, a person lies on a mat, staring into the dark, not yet asleep, but no longer fully awake. The night is not heavy, it is present. And in this in-between, Greece is closest. Not the Greece of maps or books or ruins beneath plexiglass, but the Greece of touch and sound and memory without form. The Greece that lives in the space between waking and dreaming. When the mind loosens its grip on certainty and begins to drift, not away from reality, but deeper into it. You might see a mountain that is not where it should be, that never's raisins breaky. You might hear a name, Phaedra, Alcibiades, Euripides, and not know if it came from a story or from a dream you had long ago in another life, under another sky. And then, without choosing, you find yourself walking along a worn footpath in that Greece. The stones beneath your feet are warm. Your sandals creak faintly. The air smells of rosemary and bread. Ahead of you, the land unfolds in terraces. Olive trees casting shadows like fingers across the slopes. Vines heavy with fruit. Cicadas calling as if they've never stopped. You pass a shepherd, his staff crooked with age, his goats nosing through the brush. He nods to you, but you see. He has seen you before. Perhaps not today. Perhaps not in this life. But his eyes say, I remember, and you remember too, though not in words. You remember the pattern of woven cloth drying in the wind. You remember the way water sounds as it's poured from one is real. You remember the ache of longing, the sweetness of reunion, the heaviness of olives pressed into oil. You remember stories told not to entertain, but to anchor. You come to a town, or perhaps it's just a collection of homes. The streets are narrow, the walls are white, du revolvers. Lamps burn low, and people sit outside in the night air, not speaking loudly, just being. They look at you, some nod. One gestures toward an empty seat. You sit. No one asks your name. No one asks why you came. Because in this place, this Greece that exists within and without, Gruyere. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to remember how the myths ended. You only have to sit in the quiet, breathe with the land, and let yourself be held. Maybe someone sings, a voice without words rising like a tharp. Maybe someone tells a story, but in a language you don't quite know. You understand it all the same. There is a woman who once danced barefoot in the dust of Delphi, who now weaves baskets and whispers lines of poetry. There is a man who once stood before a king with nothing in his hands but a question, who now lights lamps in the temple before dawn. There is a child who dreams of a river that speaks, of birds that remember their names from life to life. And there is you, breathing, listening, present because Greece is not a place you visit once. It is a place you return to, even when you never leave your room. It is the soft sound of thought before sleep. It is the hush, the soft, the speech, It is the shape of silence when that silence is full of memory. You close your eyes and the path continues through groves, past wells, toward the sea. You hear the waves before you see them, slow, deliberate, old. You walk across the sand. You sit on a rock. The sea. The stars above you are the same that watched Themistocles, Sappho, Herotatus, Penelope. They burn as they always have, indifferent and present. You dip your fingers in the water. It's cold, real. And in that moment, not in, that beauty is not the shape of a statue. It is the way water sounds against the hull of a boat carved by hand. That truth is not what can be proved. It is what stays with you when the voice of the storyteller fades and you're left alone in the dark, still thinking. Var, fol Gidigove. That home is not where you were born. It is where your soul recognizes itself. In a rhythm, a stone, a question. And so you sleep. But because it has folded itself around you, gently, like a linen blanket, and Greece sleeps in you. Somewhere inland, far from the coasts where sails bloom like white leaves on the horizon, a village wakes not with bells, but with motion. Before the sun has lifted above the hills, the air is cool, heavy with the scent of crushed fruit and stone. The millstone groans as it turns, slow, deliberate, its path worn into the floor over generations. A mule walks in patient circles, led by a boy too young to know the rhythm, but old enough to feel it in his feet. The pulp gathers, the oil separates. Sacred as Britta's memory, but not far away, a woman kneels beside the loom. Her shuttle flicks through the water with steady grace, not as art but as necessity. She is not weaving for trade or vanity. She is weaving the tunic her son will wear to his wedding. She is weaving, without knowing it, the continuity of her line, knot by knot, thread by thread. Outside, under a cypress tree, an old man carves wood. Not statues, not icons, just spoons, bowls, handles, things meant to be used, to wear down to produce yuri. Share. He runs his thumb along the grain, feels for cracks before they show. He sharpens with a stone his grandfather used. The shavings gather at his feet like dry petals. They are relationships, between people and material, between effort and time, between silence and meaning. In the fields beyond, the cycle continues. The earth is not tilled by machines. It is turned by hand, by oxen, by sweat. Seeds and fasking peel, steered weeds. The sun climbs. Shoulders darken, shadows shorten. A man wipes his brow with the edge of his sleeve and offers water to the girl beside him without a word. She drinks, nods, and passes it back. This is work not marked by hours, but by light. You stop, silence. You rest when your hands lose precision, and in the evening, as the light softens into amber and the cicadas fall quiet, the day exhales. The family gathers in the courtyard. There is bread, a little cheese, olives of course, wrinkled, rich, sharp. Maybe a stew with lentils and onion, simmered for hours in the coals. The wine is watered, but warm with the sun's memory. No one eats in silence, but no one dominates the conversation. It flows like the oil earlier. Slow, steady, golden. Stories are told. Not odious. About the year the snows came late. About the time the figs ripened too early and spoiled before the festival. About the stranger who once passed through. Left behind a knife, no one could sharpen the same way. And under all of it, the sense that it of us all. A loop traced again and again, not as repetition, but as return. The sea plays its part too, far away, but never absent. Its winds reach even here, in rustles through the fig leaves, in sudden gusts that scatter grain across the stone floor. Salt rides the air, verkleed is het ser. Vere is restless. The people inland know the sea, not by sight, but by what it leaves: stories, shells, salt, sailors returning or not returning. In the port towns, life moves to a different rhythm. Boats come each other across decks, slick with water, and many days to sea. Nets hang from beams like curtains. Sails are patched in the sun. Tar boils in blackened pots. Children learn the names of ships before they learn their letters. Women mend not only clothes, but sails, nets, ropes. Their needles are large, their stitches firm. They do not flinch when a line snaps, when a hull cracks. They know how to boil seaweed for medicine, how to wait without asking questions. And every evening, someone walks the shore, looking for driftwood or answers. The sea gives do not we. In one such town, an elderly man with a limp opens his shutters just as the sun meets the water. He lights a lamp, though there is still enough light. He does not like the moment when day becomes night without acknowledgement. He sits with his scrolls, some written by hand, others copied, others just fragments. He reads slowly, tracing the lines with a fingertip hardened by years at sea. Every once in a while he nods, not because he agrees, but because he remembers something. Avoy. He does not consider himself a scholar, but he knows the winds by their sounds. He knows the stars by their order. And he knows that sometimes truth comes not from what is written, but from what is lived and felt. And the nature of this place. This ancient living Greece is not in its ruins, though they are many, nor in its myth, though they are deep. It is in this interplay of mind and matter, of past and present, holding each other not in cool, below beweegt. As the fire is lit for the night meal, someone pauses and lifts their head. There's a smell, distant, almost unreal, of wild thyme, smoke, salt, and fresh bread. It touches something beneath memory, and no one speaks of it. But they all breathe deeper. Not the map, but the knowing that you are home, even if you've never been here before. The sounds of Greece are not written in scores. They are not performed in concert halls or studied in conservatories. They live in courtyards, in threshing floors, in fishing boats, in stone kitchens where wooden spoons scrape the bottom of clay pots. They live in voices, not always in tune, but always certain. Each region has its own kind of memory. Maybe. In the north, the lyra sings, 3 strings, bowed and trembling, played not for elegance, but for remembrance. Its notes are raw, bending in and out of pitch, like someone speaking through tears and wine. In the islands, the lauto strums bright and dry, fast like the wind, with fingers moving, as if chasing something they'll never catch. The laughter of the sea, perhaps, or the echo of a dancer's heel against a wooden floor long buried by dust and time. But the most powerful instrument has always been the voice. Not the trained voice of theatre, but the lived voice of age, of firelight, of sleepless nights and open windows. The voice of a grandmother who, while the other stirs lentils. The voice of a fisherman who sings to the sea, not to please it, but to remind it that he still remembers who he is. The voice of a man walking home alone through the fields, humming not because he's happy, but because silence would be heavier. These songs, the metica, the people's songs, are not written down. They are passed from mouth to mouth, across generations, through breath. You cannot learn them from someone who has lived long enough to forget where they first heard the words. But not d'oises fois, as usual, they sing of lost love, of unreturned sons, of spring rains and dry wells, of bread shared between enemies, of a tree that still blooms on the grave of a woman who once danced better than all the others. The meter is uneven, the melody shifts, but the feeling holds. The wa-duas, Allah. The, and in the spaces between the verses, the little silences where the singer draws breath or touches their scarf, there lives the entire world. Hunger, joy, forgiveness, longing, surrender. Sometimes the songs come at weddings. A girl sings as she weaves a garland. Her voice cracks on a high note, and everyone smiles, because that's how her mother's voice cracked too, years ago, at her own wedding. The circle completes. A grandmother wipes her eyes, not from sadness, but because the thread held. Other ties, as grapes are pressed and skins tossed aside, as the juice runs thick and purple and barefoot laughter echoes across the fields. Someone starts to sing, no invitation, just a rising of sound as natural as dusk. Others join in, some hum, some clap. No one leads. Ours goes cues. No one needs to, and in moments of mourning, the song becomes breath itself, low, repetitive, half sung, half spoken. A chant, a keening, a testimony. The dead are remembered not in silence, but in story. Their names are sung, not to summon them, to a coup, the temps for songs at an end. So they do not cross alone. In this way, Greece sings itself alive, again and again, not for show, not for records, but because the body remembers what the mind forgets. Because a melody can reach places in the soul no sentence ever could. Because the singers weave that salve. In the market squares, old men with cracked hands and bent backs still whistle tunes no one else seems to know. In the tavernas, the lute players joke with each other, sipping coffee between verses. Eyes half closed, feet tapping not to keep rhythm. but because their legs know it before their mouths do. On balconies above the alleyways, women hang laundry to dry and murmur the lines of love songs that haven't been fashionable for 50 years and never needed to be. And at night, when the stories have been told and the fire has settled to ash and the village grows quiet, a single voice might rise, clear, thin, distant. Someone walking home late, or someone unable to sleep, sings not to anyone, but to the air itself. And thee? Because it has always listened. Because it carries every voice that has ever passed through it. Because in Greece, nothing truly disappears, it simply changes. Key, Greece is a land of stones, but it is never barren. The stones themselves bloom. In spring, cracks between slabs that have held heat for centuries are filled with colour. Small flowers no taller than a child's finger, purple and yellow and white, bursting out of nothing with the certainty of prophecy. The people here do not name them with scientific precision. They call them simply those that come early, those that burn red, those that close at night. It is enough. No one owns the names. Everyone shares the knowing. The olive tree is the first to be seen and the last to be forgotten. Its bark twists like must the bow. Its roots break through terraces and stone walls as if memory itself had weight. It bears fruit slowly, stubbornly, never in a rush, and always in defiance of logic. Some years it gives almost nothing, others it overflows. An old woman once said, "The olive gives what the sky lets fall, and what the earth remembers, not what we deserve." And people believed her, because they had seen too many trees feed a village, and then, just as easily, rest them for a season, largely. There are fig trees too, growing wild on the edge of ruins. Their leaves broad, green, thick-veined, like the backs of hands that have pulled too many ropes. They drop fruit without apology. Overripe soft, bursting on stone, with a sound like a sigh. Children run barefoot to catch them, sticky fingers, purple lips, eyes wide with the rush of something sweet that asks for nothing in return. Along the coast, the wind shapes more than sails. It bends the cypress trees into bowing silhouettes that hold their posture for decades. It sharpens the smell of sea lavender into something medicinal. It sings through the reeds, never with melody, but always with message. Fishermen say the wind knows who will return before they even leave the shore. And sometimes, a child is born with hair that won't stay down, and someone in the village will say, "This one carries the wind." The animals are no less woven into the story. Goats that balance on cliff edge, they stop at wells even if no one tells them to. Birds flash through the sky. Falcons, sparrows, storks, swallows return to the same beams each year. No one removes the nests. To destroy a swallow's home is to invite silence. And silence in a place so bound to story. The. The sun, too, is not abstract. It is heat, yes, but also permission. It tells the bread when to rise, tells the fig when to soften, it draw when to stop, and not for use no linear. It is seasonal, cyclical, interlude. For these laws, but you do not ask what all it is. You ask what light, what wind, what smell. You do not schedule. You observe. You do not. You learn it. And small. You spoo round. You play not thy calendar, but yea, plumes. You ver, fer, sti, me, she, very. You hours to in the wheat speaks in the wind, when the grap stand your fenger, ear or mouth, when the almond fall, without needing to be shaken. This is not romanticism. This is reality when lived buried. It is not efficient. Bernard, D.V.4. And it teaches you to listen, not just to words, but to silence, to the space between crow calls, to the weight of rend beard it falls, to the moment a leaf beagled away a stone, shift remembering you, as if remembering you for you bits which you it's as deeds. To call. It watches. It speaks. Not in voice, but the lasses the foe. They offer the shapes of Bayeuv, not its argument. And the shield, half asleep, accept the answers. Beol Belvobru. And when sleep come, it come ha fog. Foo. D-E-A-E. It enters the coronary. First, the cool ones. Then, drop itself over. The body like an old road. The night. Hold the memory. And the memory holds the country. Not as history, not as myths, but as breath. Because in Greece, Buddha said, but we share vergest the readers vergest is vi. Wobadi visvan var the verder. The lullaby hummed off, because no one sings it anymore, but someone must. Faded so much it shows only big as the tree, that it's not thrown, it's the shade here. The it's the thought as the ball, me. There are altar, there are tables, fur, there, there are and in the last moment of the night, when even the dog has stopped barking, the whale in the lap with slurred bone as if the story that has been, all this way, has now found its resting place, not an ending, a resting place, and from that place, sleep opens, deep, gentle, like ice, do lie, the world is, the world breathe, food, voyage. And somewhere, miles, a field, tree size, a donkey turns arms in sleep. But I size these, be that sigh lift you, this, first lies, first sighs, far, yonju, far, even ra. The marble temple still stood, though some had begun to crack. The statue still caught the light, just so Z, T, the fowls, T, still D. Thus something had sifted the center, she, T, D, Descesti, stew, descend, you foe. The folky, the Disicesa, were no longer made in the Agora of Athens, or the V were made Ru, Rava, Greece, Ab. Ro, breeze, D. It was from Greece that they learned how to speak, how to sculpt, how to write, starry, that would outlive the battlefield. They took up in marble borrowed from her mountains, but they never replaced. Even me, G2 verfin, omidal, fall, gene do. To walk, the stone of Delphi, Dre, voyage, kisti, stool, to fade, died. He built the library, Derby, der first, to remind the world where the light had first come from. But Empire turned as all things do, and Rome began to fret, first at the edge, then at the heart. First at Nantergrava. And in the east, a new city rose, born from Greek blood and Roman ambition, Byzantium. Lati renamed Constantinople, it stood not as a political city, though it had changed its spoke Greek. Its laws were Roman, its faith Byzantine, but its soul still humbled with the voices. Ideas will be Byzantine Ruben Brits Bang Monks Copier. From question to contemplation. Be still in the monastery of Mount in the schools in the leave gaze. Spoken. The Ottoman entered through broken gate and raised new Bani over the dome. And for hundreds of years, Zeus overcame on Jupiter. Breeze became more that was keen. For all theirs, be cascades to kiss the blue Hades. It was the language of the even word. In village, grandmothers told children about Archie, Zaid, Reeves, Scripta, Ski. In the song sung during harvest and mourning, in the embroidery of wedding vase, in the way bros ors we you, fools sex your few folks, you fro force invest in the first. The first is me, Müller, Ferris. It began with whispers in tavern and mountain village, among cellar to European city, among Silla returning on. Amman Sheila Shu, steh mit full Sier, E.T. say full. Pompey watched. Some helped, some only pretended. But Greece, tired, battered, and sea, stood again, and remembered its own voice. In 1834, Greece was declared standing. But in war, for cheese invest. Through hardship, through politique, through invasion, through exile, through loss, but always growing. Naughton, me, du wooey, and always ye sure she. something rub around. Where people are gluedly in the streets, not from enjoy, but from passion, because David is running, because he knows munched to be Greek, truly Greek, in the way that transcends the boundaries of time and flag and border. It is a made of memory. It is a way of carrying the world inside you, not as a weight, is vegan, not with a fight gear, the CK stew, but as something fancy. To be as with the when you see beneath a vein covered TAs T you you are not me. You are me. The sun that touched your shoulder is the same one that unstride the clothes of philosophe and fisher alike. The dust on your sandal is the same that unclung to the M of priest, farmer, warriors, scribe. It is in the land, the, you, fur, do, e, fur, the, Imi sentence in Greek carry shadows, older than ink, jouer, je go, bello, rare. They are not just offering you a room. They are chillisters rooms. Watch it there just the said. When they say Kalimara, they are not just wishing you a good day. They are invoking century of greetings. Spoken Binti Gatton sea walls from island sea Dares of a singer sang, even a pop sang, something in seas lit between the knot. It is a root. You do not mourn its brokenness. You marvel at its persistence, and you understand that you own no matters, no busbrokers. Your voice drove. Your footsteps fall in the grooves carved by Million. This is why they dance. Arm hooked, step tight, face open. Not for performance, for to face. Each thought uni mishuivas. This is why they light candles, not only for Sem, but mothers, fathers, neighbors, people whose names are spoken aloud. Greece is a nation of the living and the dead, sitting at the same table. No one leaves until he shares the live finished. The starry novi the war for the even now, in the 21st century, in the age of satellite, Ndativums, our grandmother in Noxome, evil noda vinjai, chai. The grandshi, de former favor. The girl does not know the difference between myth and truth. Only that the story is hers. Jed it diet into bread. Chadvi fruit. That because of Burnham. Shande be nihazar. Be bezel. First, but nay. But way B, so the Godi remove how to speak, how to listen, in the stone, in the breath, in the fire, hide the so spake be, because night too, these forbidding is out of the memory. It's to welcome her. And silence is part of the song. To carry Greece inside you is to carry a map made in not of roads. Memory, passed down, not belongs of meme theory. You walk through a city far from the Aegean, and the way you do not need to be born in Ella to know its weight. You only need to have heard its story and believed that they meant something. Because Greece, at its deepest, is Domfe soul. It is the echo that follows a well-formed question. For It is the decision to seek beauty even the serene. Is Landu choose silence when others speak? Is with me. It is when you light a candle not to be seen, but because some part of you remember that light is sacred. There are cities today full of glass, vor mo in the schist say for your the they may never have walked the star of Delo, or seen the sun rise over, fast seen the sun way to the way. But it is not a rise. In fee lay may be. It is an inheritance of thought, passed from untoen. It is a sculptor who, though trained in New York or Paris, still draws from a sense and tension first taught on the flanks of the Parthenon. It is a shield who writes poetry, simply because they saw Jerusalem, hero, It is an old man who tells a joke that it is a woman who, sitting at her kitchen table in Bearno Hall, Melbourne, writes a recipe in the margin of a notebook passed down by her grandmother. She ate the nard. Because Greece is in the detail, in the gesture, in the remembered song, in the stubbornness of those who refuse to forger. Even now, at the end of these years long, acrostone, acros flam, you are becoming Greece. You are dizzy, Yui, for you. You have heard the voices. You have seen the firelight dancing on the walls of owls that still breathe. You have walked in rhythm with shepherds and scholar, with kings and farmer, with the lost and the returned. You have stood on the shore, where the sea speaks a language older than language. Shupuje fo kuju skuyaro. He who su for Hugo. Half of Bill's a lady's end, and you have listened. And that, more than anything else, is what Greece asks of you. Not worship, not understanding. Stone. And the only the patience to Thysian, even if no words we read, even Gucci be do Greece will live this EU os. And now the fire is low, the night is full, not empty. The full Lodies, full Rs, Brewster. Agat creeks in a village. Free is stays to Jaskati, Frigglesy. As if listening, and you, wherever you are, through. Fra Ian Fima is as body few. You have seen God born of air and thought, without a puffle for the Gububi. Morning noon with children chasing pebbles across dry culture, with old men in no lounge tell the story to be heard. But note David, there's no ending here. Like a shepherd returning to the same path, each spring finding the stone where he last left them, and feeling in his bond that God do not ask for temple, they ask to be remembered. This soft, it doesn't ask, yeah. In the rustle of leaves, in the way a name is said when no one else is listening. In the cave between footsteps. D city Greece. Or candlelight. On stone. Or silks. Free. You carry Greece. Ugaiva Namivo. Jew. Yuzo. But as a way of being still in the presence of for seeings, glitches. Here's as Odysseus. Lay the starry wrap around you, not to hold you, but to heave you hold.